all the people that have gone out there against the mainstream media and said, you're going to call us racist? You're going to call us potential Timothy McVeighs? Fuck you. War.
Quite sure he's right. An obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
War.
This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Friday, June 20th, 2025, the 152nd day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. Here we are on Friday. I hope you all are doing just so well out there. I didn't even pull up my Substack nor my YouTube screens. What is going on? I don't want to leave those good people out of the conversation, although it's a little harder to pay attention to that. Anyhow, we will eventually get to some Iran and Israel stuff later on in the show, and it's going to be nice not to have to talk about it for the entire thing. We're going to go back to some of the issues that we've been tracking for a long time, longer than that, and let's start with not only the courts and their treatment of Donald Trump, but some issues that we discussed last week and the week before with the National Guard and their presence in California. Let me just get this pulled up. We're going to go to X, formerly Twitter, and Politico's Kyle Cheney. Here we are. So this is from yesterday. A federal appeals court has indefinitely blocked Judge Breyer's order to put Gavin Newsom back in control of the National Guard. The three-judge panel, which included two Trump and one Biden appointee, was unanimous. And so Judge Breyer there is the son of former Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer. Here is some more on that decision from Fox News. Trump scores major win against Newsom in battle for National Guard control. In a unanimous ruling from the Ninth Circuit of Court of Appeals on Thursday, President Donald Trump was allowed to keep control of National Guard troops deployed to Los Angeles. The ruling stays the lower court order that ordered command of the troops back to California Governor Gavin Newsom. The president hasn't made a decision about the deployment of the National Guard without permission of the state's governor since 1965. In the filing, the court stated that they believed the president had made a lawful decision. Affording the president that deference, we conclude that it is likely that the president lawfully exercised his statutory authority under Section 12406, subsection 3, which authorizes federalization of the National Guard when the president is unable with the regular forces to execute the laws of the United States. They also stated they disagreed with Newsom's argument that the president's decision to federalize members of the California National Guard is completely insulated from judicial review. Let us go to Donald Trump's response to all of this, if it will ever pull up. There we go. It's like I'm playing pin the tail on the donkey with my notes application where I have all these links set up in my run of show. Sometimes it doesn't allow you to click on the link and you're just trying to hit it. Feeling all dumb. All right, here's Donald Trump on Truth Social. Big win in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals on the president's core power to call in the National Guard. The judges obviously realize that Gavin Newsom is incompetent and ill-prepared, but this is much bigger than Gavin because all over the United States, if our cities and our people need protection, we are the ones to give it to them, should state and local police be unable, for whatever reason, to get the job done. This is a great decision for our country, and we will continue to protect and defend law-abiding Americans. Congratulations to the Ninth Circuit. America is proud of you tonight. And I mentioned this morning on Badlands Daily, it's interesting that he's congratulating the judges and saying America is proud of you. You got to wonder if there were various points of leverage attempting to make these judges decide the opposite way. That would have probably been a relatively big deal. We've had the discussions about whether or not court decisions are binding in any important way without an enforcement mechanism. Does anyone have to follow them? But we don't have to get to that point on this one. We've also covered kind of some of the secret societies that operate in the legal sector and the courts. So you never know where influence is coming on these judges, why they would make a decision one way or another. And Donald Trump is giving them a pretty solid hat tip there. So it does make me wonder. Now we have the issue settled, at least for now, on the National Guard. Trump is going to bring the National Guard out to wherever it's needed, whenever he sees fit, believes that it is needed. Now, in terms of states' rights, you would want the states to be able to have their militias and be in control of those militias and be able to block the federal government from kind of subsuming their militias in an ideal circumstance where we don't have a standing army in the country. And maybe we'll get back there one day, but we're not there now. And the other side of that issue is, what if it just happens to be the case that one of our states, let's say California, for instance, is welcoming an invasion of 5 million people and or 10 million people or 15 million people. I mean, they say California's got like 40 million people in it. Could there be 5 or 10 or 15 million illegal aliens? Yes, absolutely. And especially once the birthright citizenship thing gets sorted out, that could be even more than that. It wouldn't shock me at all. They admit to like 1 million undocumented just in Los Angeles. And you've got 3 other major cities. You got San Francisco, and actually that's like a huge like multi-city. You got San Francisco, you got Oakland, then you got San Jose not too far away. Millions and millions and millions. San Diego, Sacramento. California's big. So they use those illegal aliens to get their proportional funding from federal government appropriations. Those illegal aliens count as part of their population in the census for apportionment in the Congress and for electoral votes. It's a big deal. And if one of the states is going to allow an invasion, is it the president's responsibility? Is it the responsibility of the federal government to make sure that California cannot do that to the detriment of people in all the other states? You know, people like Bill Maher, I remember always talking about how California is actually underrepresented because they have such a massive population and they only have 2 senators. Like South Dakota or Wyoming, they have a very tiny population. 1/40th the size or less of California. Why do they get 2 senators as well? Now, there are the constitutional arguments for all that. But the other aspect is the number they're using to base all of that on is not American citizens. It's Americans plus who knows how many illegal aliens. So what would be the our principled stance, understanding the necessity for state rights, not wanting a federal government that will encroach on the states, not wanting a standing army, wanting the homelands defended, believing that the military is actually to defend the United States, not go wage foreign wars. So, of course, the military can operate on American soil. But can they allow an invasion? And does the federal government need that power to repel an invasion if one of the states decides to allow an invasion? And that's what we've seen. And it's not just one of the states, of course. It's California, and it's Oregon, and it's Washington on that blue wall side. And then, of course, you got Arizona and New Mexico, and they got a lot of illegals. And then you got Texas and Florida, and there's tons of illegals in both of those places. And then you got all the other states, and there's tons of illegals there too. So if they're going to allow an invasion, should the federal government be able to step in? As long as we are playing under these rules, I think the federal government has to be able to step in, and hopefully we can get to a better and more rational, more constitutional process, a new way to look at that and to handle these things in the future that would more resemble the founders' original intent. But we are not there right now. All right, more court stuff. This is from Wednesday, and we didn't get to this in our Wednesday episode. Hold on for processing. One moment here. Now everything is better. This is from NBC News. Supreme Court upholds Tennessee ban on transgender youth medical care. So I would imagine that the Daily Weimar has been covering this for the last 6 months and probably wet themselves on Wednesday finding this out. Look, everybody, we won. Now the people will forever know who has the wee-wees and who has the hoo-haws. Will they still have to cover trans issues? Will they still be producing 24 hours of transgender content per day, 7 days a week? Of course they will. What else are they going to talk about? The Supreme Court on Wednesday upheld a Tennessee law restricting gender transition care for minors, delivering a major blow to transgender rights. Disallowing transgender transition care for minors is a blow to transgender rights. What rights did they lose? Well, they didn't lose any rights. What they're concerned about, I guess, is the rights of pharmaceutical companies to turn children into forever clients by destroying their potential for a normal normal and healthy sex life and, sexual outlook. Instead, they should be allowed to be scarred forever, and that would be a benefit to transgender rights. No, it might be a benefit to the transgender agenda. The 6-3 ruling is likely to have a broad impact, as 24 other states have already enacted similar laws similar to the one in in Tennessee, which bars gender transition surgery, puberty blockers, and hormone therapy for youth. Those laws now look set to survive similar legal challenges. The ruling does not affect states that do not have such bans, meaning care in those states will still be available. And that is pretty creepy. I guess, man, how can you, I don't know if they're going to be able to contest along these lines. The court was divided on ideological lines, with the 6 conservatives in the majority and the 3 liberals in dissent. And we need to stop thinking about the court that way and talking about the court that way, especially because the conservatives aren't that conservative, except for a couple of them. And the distinction in those terms is erased and becomes meaningless when you understand the uniparty. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice John Roberts concluded that the Tennessee law does not constitute a form of sex discrimination that would violate the Constitution's 14th Amendment. And then they go into some of the quotes from the opinions, both for and against. And let's go to Twitter and get some more in-depth quotes than the NBC article gives us. This is opinion authored by Chief Justice John Roberts. This case carries with it the weight of fierce scientific and policy debates about the safety, efficacy, and propriety of medical treatments in an evolving field. The voices in these debates raise sincere concerns. The implications for all are profound. The Equal Protection Clause does not resolve these disagreements, nor does it afford us license to decide them as we see best. Our role is not to, quote, judge the wisdom, fairness, or logic, end quote, of the law before us. This is, and he cites Beach Communications, but only to ensure that it does not violate the equal protection guarantee of the 14th Amendment, which is not properly ratified and has to be overturned at some point. We shall see when. Having concluded that it does not, we leave questions regarding its policy to the people, their elected representatives, and the democratic process. The judgment of the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit is affirmed. So for now, I mean, maybe not for now, but all that we've reached for now is that these states who have banned transition surgeries and transition care, which probably includes the puberty blockers and the rest of it for minors, they are allowed to do that. That does not violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. So saith the Supreme Court. Now, we are coming up to the end of June. We're 10 days away from the end of June. And as we've discussed many times, you probably all know that the end of June is when the Supreme Court releases all the major decisions. And so we will be seeing more of those. This was one of those, but there are many more. Actually, before we get there, I forgot to read from Sotomayor's Dissent, going back to Shannon Bream on X, formerly Twitter. Sotomayor says, this case presents an easy question, whether SB 1's ban on certain medications, applicable only if used in a manner, quote, inconsistent with sex, contains a sex classification. Because sex determines access to the covered medications, it clearly does. Yet the majority refuses to call a spade a spade. Instead, it obfuscates a sex classification that is plain on the face of this statute, all to avoid the mere possibility that a different court could strike down SB 1 or categorical healthcare bans like it. The court's willingness to do so here does irrevocable damage to the Equal Protection Clause and invites legislatures to engage in discrimination by hiding blatant sex classifications in plain sight. It also authorizes, without second thought, untold harm to transgender children and the parents and families who love them, because there is no constitutional justification for that result. I dissent. Okay. Now, not all of that is a bad point. There's clearly a sex classification in there. If a drug that is acceptable for young boys to take becomes unacceptable for young girls to take, then there's a sex classification in there. And I guess that means that they're not sharing an equal protection under the law. But the truth is, for minors, that kind of gets wiped away because it shouldn't be happening at all. I mean, that's conceptual, in theory, that's like what we would want in a practical way. But the legal issues are interesting. And as we always discuss with the court cases, they could play out either way. And what's important is that we get back to the original Constitution as quickly as we can. Decisions on a practical level that are good for our side of an issue. I always think of that as secondary to whether or not the decisions are good in leading us back toward the original Constitution. And, you kind of have to defer to people like Justice Thomas in those cases because he is a firm originalist, and Alito is as well, from what we understand. So, man, already hitting some Rumble rants in the chat. $20, Miranda 316. First Rumble rant ever. Thank you for everything you do. Well, thank you very much for your first Rumble rant ever, Miranda. I am honored. J Drake 83. Welcome to Miranda and her first rant. Given her newbie status, we'll overlook the obvious missed opportunity to give a certain shout out, and we'll give it here. APL forever. That's right. That's right. We have successfully completed that task. Let's stick with the Supreme Court for just a few. This is the Associated Press earlier today. Supreme Court work goes on with 10 cases to decide, including birthright citizenship. And actually, you know what? Let's go through the first few paragraphs here, but then I have a Chat GPT conversation that gives us a much better rundown of these. We'll hit some of these big ones and then we'll go to that. The Supreme Court is in the home stretch of a term that has lately been dominated by the Trump administration's emergency appeals of lower court orders seeking to slow President Donald Trump's efforts to remake the federal government. And that is a fair description of that. Another description that would also be fair would be that they are attempting to thwart the obvious mandate of the people given to Donald Trump to reform the government in exactly the ways he's doing and to reform society using the government in exactly the ways he's doing. He was given that mandate in overwhelming fashion and still maintains it in overwhelming fashion. But the justices also have 10 cases to resolve that were argued between December and mid-May. One of the argued cases was an emergency appeal, the administration's bid to be allowed to enforce Trump's executive order denying birthright citizenship to U.S.-born children of parents who are in the country illegally. And on that case, it is important to remember that the argument is about ultimately whether or not these district courts can thwart the president and give out these national injunctions. Okay. So the court could decide to end that entire process in one fell swoop, and that would be amazing. At that point, the lawfare apparatus that we have seen operating on behalf of the uniparty and the global regime over the last 5 years, and I'm sure it's been throughout our entire lifetimes, but we've been observing it particularly over these last, I guess you could say 10 years, the Trump era. One of the major foundations of that could just be swept away, and that would be awesome. Also, the birthright citizenship thing, that is entirely dependent on the 14th Amendment. We talked about that at some greater length on a Friday episode, maybe a month ago. And I guess we should probably defer to that discussion rather than bring it forward again. Let me see if I can find that one. Oh, I don't know. That's the thing about Clever titles. I should have titled it, "This is the one where we talk about birthright citizenship." If birthright citizenship goes away, the number of illegal aliens in this country will skyrocket to its actual number. And at that point, holy moly. I think that there is, we talked about the National Guard earlier. I think there's reason why the National Guard is out around the country, and those kind of bullshit looking LA riots provide a justification. But man, oh man, if they were ever going to get crazy, you would think that would happen after major Supreme Court decisions that might overturn things that are critical to their entire system, like birthright citizenship, like the illegal aliens being allowed to stay, and the national injunctions as part of a major part of their lawfare apparatus. Things could get really interesting in the next few weeks when it comes to that stuff. And then, as we'll see in a little bit, there could be election stuff on the horizon as well. So some of the remaining cases, they mention the birthright citizenship order that has been blocked by lower courts. Look at this. They say the nationwide court orders have emerged as an important check on Trump's efforts and a source of mounting frustration to the Republican president and his allies. Well, you can describe it that way, but what it is a total usurpation of Trump's executive authority under the Constitution. The court seems likely to side with Maryland parents in a religious rights case over LGBTQ storybooks in public schools. And all that is to give parents the option to opt out and take their kids out of the classroom, remove them while that sort of thing is being taught. A 3-year battle over the congressional districts in Louisiana is making its second trip to the Supreme Court. The case involves the interplay between race and politics in drawing political boundaries in front of a conservative-led court that has been skeptical of considerations of race in public life. And again, equal protection under the 14th Amendment, Civil Rights Act, all of these things have to be removed at some point because there is no constitutional foundation for any of them. As we have talked about numerous times in this show, I believe, and I think that it's irrefutable, that the Constitution was intentionally inverted during the Civil War and through the Reconstruction. Our secret Constitution, George Fletcher, the Columbia Law School professor, in Our Secret Constitution, he argues that the Reconstruction Amendments were intended to invert the Constitution, changing us from a republic into a democracy, taking a focus away from individual rights and moving it to the good of the state overall, the federal state, and getting rid of the focus on individual liberties, replacing it with equality among all people. And they essentially gave themselves in the 14th Amendment, they gave the government the power to monitor all business and personal, private transactions and interactions to make sure that no slavery was happening. Well, is slavery still happening in our country? Yes, it is. And it's even happening to the American people who are registered and given numbers so that they can be owned by the global regime bankers and then have their energy and productivity systematically stripped away from them over time and devalued over time. That, my friends, is some form of slavery. The justices are weighing a Texas law aimed at blocking kids from seeing online pornography. The question for the court is whether the measure infringes on the constitutional rights of adults as well. The Free Speech Coalition, an adult entertainment industry trade group, agrees that children shouldn't be seeing pornography, but it says the Texas law is written too broadly and wrongly affects adults by requiring them to submit personal identifying information online that is vulnerable to hacking or tracking. But here's the thing, you know how you can avoid that? Stop watching porn. Then you really don't have to worry about it at all, do you? And you know, it's hard to feel much sympathy for the producers of pornography in this country and the unbelievable proliferation of pornography, particularly in the last 30 years in the internet era. Just it's everywhere now. All right, so here are the other cases. This is Trump v. CASA with New Jersey and Washington. This is about the nationwide injunctions. And again, you can see the media coverage focusing on the birthright citizenship piece of it, but it's really about nationwide injunctions. U.S. versus Skirmetti. That's the ban on gender affirming care. And we've seen how that turned out. Mahmoud versus Taylor, parental right to opt children out of LGBTQ themed school storybooks under the free exercise clause. Louisiana congressional redistricting, whether creating a second black majority district violated or respected the Voting Rights Act and race considerations. How about that? The same law could have either violated or totally respected these laws. Discrimination, you have to remember, only works in one direction. Although the courts just reversed a case about discrimination working in only one direction a couple of weeks ago. And so I would think that they will probably give down the opinion that creating black majority districts because you have created a need for a black majority district is not at all constitutional. It's preposterous. We just talked about the age verification to access adult websites. There are two cases on the Affordable Care Act. There's one on Medicaid provider choice. This is a Planned Parenthood case, whether Medicaid patients can provider shop, including choosing providers like Planned Parenthood for reproductive health care. And you're starting to get really dangerously close at that point. They've been saying over the last few decades that Planned Parenthood provides services other than abortion care. And so when it receives federal funding, that's fine because they're not using it for abortions. But of course, the comeback is conclusive. That is that this money is fungible. You can say you're not using it for abortion care, but that is primarily what you do. You are essentially Planned Parenthood, an abortion factory. And it was intended as such by the people who started Planned Parenthood, like Margaret Sanger, the eugenicist, and Bill Gates' dad. So, Smith versus Horn, cases on employment and wage law, several employment law decisions, reverse discrimination standards, ADA retiree benefit claims, overtime exemptions, management of benefit plans. That's a lot of issues in that case. FDA versus e-cigarette and tobacco manufacturers case. That's kind of boring. Although if I looked into it and started digging on it, I'd probably find out maybe it's not as boring as I thought. Okay, let's keep going. We've got that boring court stuff out of the way. It's not all boring. Some of it's boring. I think it's about to get really exciting. This is from Wednesday. Senate Republicans hold hearing on Biden's mental fitness as Democrats boycott. That's not the only thing the hearing was covering. Nearly 6 months after Joe Biden left the White House, Senate Republicans are still scrutinizing his presidency, kicking off the first in what's expected to be a series of congressional hearings this year on his mental fitness in office. Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee brought in 3 witnesses Wednesday, none of whom served in Biden's administration, as if that matters, to scrutinize his time in office, arguing that Biden, his staff, and the media must be held accountable. Democrats boycotted the hearing and criticized Republicans for armchair diagnosing Biden when the committee could be looking into serious matters. Now, if it was just them asking about Biden's mental fitness, maybe we would have, these Democrats and the media would have a point on this, but that's not all it is, because what we're really talking about here is the autopen, and we'll get to that in just a second. Republicans played clips during the hearing Wednesday of Democrats defending Biden. In the montage, the Democrats talk about how Biden was mentally sharp when he was in office. Most Democrats on this committee have chosen to all but boycott the hearing and have failed to call a single witness. They have chosen to ignore this issue like they ignored President Biden's decline. And of course, they do not want to be taking part in a hearing like that. What are they going to do? Ask the witnesses? Are they going to try to defend Biden's mental fitness in their line of questioning? They don't even want to talk about the autopen. And that was at the center of this hearing. Senator Dick Durbin, the committee's top Democrat, criticized Republicans for holding a hearing on the last president at a time when, quote, numerous critical challenges facing the nation that are under our jurisdiction. Ah, yes, the old, this is a distraction from the important things we have to do. Hey, Dick, the important thing we have to do is eradicate any notion that Joe Biden was actually president. That's what we have to do. And it's going swimmingly. Apparently, armchair diagnosing former President Biden is more important than the issues of grave concern. Ah, yes, Dick Durbin. After his opening remarks, Durbin played a video montage of his own, but with clips of Trump speaking that he said reflected the cognitive ability of the current president. Durbin left the hearing after his opening remarks. And does anyone believe that Trump has cognitive issues? It's not just we can find enough clips of Biden to make it look like he has cognitive issues. It's that everything Biden does proves that he has cognitive issues, whereas nothing Trump does proves that. If you flub a word or say something stupid or forget something momentarily, that is not proof of cognitive decline. And if it is, then I am also experiencing cognitive decline. You could certainly take all the episodes of my show, chop them up, find the times I've said stupid things or forgot what I was going to say or flubbed some words or whatever. Happens every day. It's a normal course. In the normal course of things, that sort of thing happens consistently, especially when you're on and speaking as much as a president would be in public or as much as, someone like me does. You do 6 to 10 hours a week of original content, you're going to flub some words. You're going to forget some things, and it's just going to happen. So let's go to the autopen part of this issue. This is Theodore Wold, and he is going to break down what they have found regarding the autopen. This clip is actually about 5 minutes long, but I think it's important and interesting. So this was his opening statement before the committee, or this may have been the Armed Services Committee. So another hearing on Biden's mental decline. I'm going to check that. Here's the clip.
For the opportunity to testify this morning about how the cover-up of President Biden's mental decline endangered America's national security and undermined the Constitution. The U.S. Constitution vests executive power in a single person, the president. At the founding, the president exercised the executive power through only a small group of trusted advisors and personnel. In fact, President Washington had a 4-member cabinet. Today, the president directs a Leviathan executive branch with 15 cabinet departments and at least 4 million full-time executive branch employees. The executive branch proliferation has a single source of democratic legitimacy, that by order of U.S. Constitution's Article 2, the president is both elected by the American people and vested with the executive power, all of it. Traditionally, the president takes positive actions and authenticates those actions through his signature. His signature is required for the most significant actions he may undertake: to sign an executive order, to take any action invested in him by the Constitution, as in granting a pardon, and to take the most important action of all, to sign a bill into law. In all these cases, the president's signature is itself the protection of democratic principle. When the president signs, he communicates his assent and endorsement of the action he takes. The autopen is a device that signs the president's signature to a document. The Oversight Project, of which I am a board member, has discovered that the Biden White House deployed an autopen to affix President Biden's signature to pardons, prison commutations, executive orders, and presidential proclamations. The Oversight Project's research has found that the Biden White House first deployed the autopen to affix President Biden's signature to a proclamation on day 5 of his administration, and that there were at least 3 different autopen signatures in use throughout President Biden's tenure in the White House. In June 2022,
Let's pause right there for a second. Okay, so I did check, and I don't know why the clip is provided by the Armed Services Committee. I'm finding that he testified before judiciary, so I'm going to stick with that. 5 days in, and they're already using the autopen for Biden. I also thought it was awesome that he described how things used to be. George Washington had 4 cabinet members. Now, Joe Biden, the fake president, is overseeing a sprawling executive branch bureaucracy of like 4 million federal employees. That's bananas. Let's continue.
The Biden White House began deploying the autopen to sign clemency warrants and executive orders. Autopen use skyrocketed from there. We found that of the 51 clemency warrants issued during the Biden presidency, over half, 32 in total, were signed with an autopen. And these include some of the most controversial acts of clemency of the Biden presidency, including death row commutations and the preemptive pardons of members of the Biden family, Dr. Anthony Fauci, General Mark Milley, and more that were issued in the final days of the Biden presidency. We reviewed President Biden's schedule in his publicly available media and were unable to find any record of President Biden's personally approving these actions, such as a statement issued by the president himself to reporters. In addition, we found that the Biden White House used the autopen to affix President Biden's signature to clemency warrants and executive orders while the president himself was in Washington, D.C. for at least some of that day, and thus was presumably available to sign important executive actions. Finally, we found multiple days where President Biden wet signed a bill into law, but used an autopen to issue an executive order or for other important executive actions. The Biden White House's widespread use of an autopen to affix President Biden's signatures to documents that exercise executive powers belonging solely to the president poses significant constitutional, legal, and practical considerations. Once the president's signature is copied and loaded into the autopen, the machine can sign documents as the president himself would. To be blunt, by using the autopen, anyone can sign documents as the president himself. Now, to be clear, I'm not here today to suggest that the autopen is bad. It's just technology. I'm here today because of questions concerning President Biden's capacity and whether the autopen was used to usurp presidential power or to conceal the president's decline. As the sitting president's mental acuity declined, potentially to the point of incapacitation, his administration's expansion of the powers of the presidency raises more questions than answers. Any investigation into this matter should focus not only on whether President Biden directed or authorized subordinate staff to take action in certain instances, but whether he had the capacity to do so at all. The 25th Amendment lays out clear procedures for what to do when the president is incapacitated. It was carefully drafted and informed by our nation's history. The Biden administration ignored it all to aggrandize executive power and push the country further in their preferred ideological direction. It is our obligation at this point to get to the bottom of these issues and to ask the important question as to whether or not the autopen and other devices were used to cover and obscure President Biden's mental decline, undermining our national security and also the Constitution.
Well, using it to obscure Biden's mental decline, I don't know about that part, and I honestly don't care about that part. I care about whether or not everything signed with the autopen will be eradicated. And it has to be. In fact, everything that Biden did has to be eradicated. It doesn't matter if he put his own signature on it or not. And I mean, how many times did he sign things? I wonder what those things were. We shall see. Who was controlling the autopen? Trump has said before that person is president. They should be investigating who was controlling the autopen. Maybe one day we'll find out. Maybe it was Donald Trump. Maybe it was the military. Who was running this whole project? Or maybe it was just these bureaucratic stooges throughout the administrative deep state. Whatever they needed to get done to keep the system rolling, they would just slap old Joe's signature on it and feed it into the system. Okay. So let's move from one, or I guess there's two brands of Biden illegitimacy wrapped up in that hearing, the dementia and the autopen. But let's go to the heart of the matter. This is Donald Trump yesterday on Truth Social. The crooked Fox News polls got the election wrong. I won by much more than they said I would, and have been biased against me for years. They are always wrong and negative. It's why MAGA hates Fox News, even though their anchors are great. This has gone on for years, but they never change the incompetent polling company that does their work. Now, a new Fox News poll comes out this morning, giving me a little more than 50% at the border, and yet the border is miraculously perfect. Nobody was able to come in last month. 60,000 people came in with Sleepy Joe in the same month last year. I hate fake pollsters, one of the worst, but Fox will never change their discredited pollster. So Fox is keeping their fake pollster. MAGA hates Fox News, Trump says, even though their anchors are great. Now, are their anchors great? I would say, obviously, that's not the case. But there's a lot of people out there who think that those anchors are their friends, and Donald Trump's not trying to create a contest and say, well, Fox is terrible, and Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity and Mark Levin and Jesse Waters and whoever else they have on that godforsaken network, that those people are also bad, because then people get defensive. This way, people won't get defensive. So it's a very savvy public communication, and Trump is great about public communications. He's always had a skill for interacting with PR and with media and presenting his case to whatever audience he needs to present it to. So let's keep going. We have one more. Yeah, this is where I want it to be. This is Donald Trump this morning. So he talks a little bit about by how much he won that 2024 election, fake election though it was. Fox News's polls did not show the true strength of his position, and they still don't. This morning, he says, 0 border crossings for the month for Trump versus 60,000 for sleepy, crooked Joe Biden. A man who lost the 2020 presidential election by a quote-unquote landslide, ! Biden was grossly incompetent, and the 2020 election was a total fraud in all caps. The evidence is massive and overwhelming. A special prosecutor must be appointed. This cannot be allowed to happen again in the United States of America. Let the work begin. What this crooked man and his corrupt cronies have done to our country in 4 years is grossly indescribable. Make America great again. So a special prosecutor must be appointed. The 2020 election was a total fraud. The evidence is massive and overwhelming, and Joe Biden lost in a landslide. Those are all statements directly from the president, who of course knows these things. And they are directly in line with what myself and many others have been saying since late 2020. That election was obviously stolen, and therefore Joe Biden cannot be president. And, no matter how that situation came to be, we have always held to the notion that something else was going on in the background. I think it has become abundantly clear that that is the case over these many years. And one thing that may have been going on in the background that entire time was that a special prosecutor was already handling all of that. And I want to go to this clip that my good buddy John Harold posted earlier. This is from 2021 or 2022. I don't know if he said, let me just check his post really quick. I'm not sure if, I'm not sure he notes when they had this discussion, but this is John talking to Sidney Powell.
That Trump draft executive order, and this has been driving me nuts for months. The very last paragraph of this executive order, it talks about the appointment of a special counsel, and it says to carry out her duties. And everybody's been speculating who her is. And I'm wondering if you have any, I mean, it's been speculated that this could be you. I mean, do you have any input or anything you could add to this, or no comment is fine too, but
it was supposed to be me. If that order had been signed, I would have been special counsel to the president to evaluate the 2020 election and find out what really happened.
And this is an executive order that had the military basically interdicting in the elections. I mean, were you in communication with Trump over this at all?
There is a widely reported meeting that we had on December 18th in the White House. And I testified about that before the January 6th committee also. He actually named me special counsel that night. He turned to White House counsel and asked if he had the authority to do that. And White House counsel said, yes, he did. And so he did it 3 separate times in front of them and everybody else that was there.
Sidney Powell, they thought about it, potentially making her a special prosecutor to handle the election stuff back then. She had multiple meetings. We knew about that at the time, of course. We've heard Sidney Powell talk many times about the Kraken. Everybody remembers that fateful day when Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, and Jenna Ellis of DeSantis simp fame stood for that press conference. It was hot in the room. Rudy Giuliani was sweating. Hair dye was dripping down his face. The optics were absolutely atrocious, but the information was still good. You know, the optics on so many of these things over the years have killed the public interest in election fraud issues because they just don't take it seriously. And someone like Mike Lindell, for instance, is hard for them to take seriously, for the public to take seriously. Part of that is the way he talks. And we've talked about that a number of times. There's just this liberal mindset that suggests people should sound a certain way. They should speak in a sophisticated manner. You know, that's how you know that they are educated, that they went to college, that they know what they're talking about. And if they don't speak in that manner, well, they just shouldn't be taken seriously at all. And so that's a problem for their interpretations of Lindell. It's also a problem for their interpretations of Donald Trump. They don't actually listen to the words Donald Trump's saying. They just hear his cadence and his voice, and that puts them off. And then they just shut down for the rest of it. Here is another quick video from Sidney Powell.
The whole media corporate government structure has been lying to us for at least 2 decades that I can count, to think that we are blue when we are actually all red. I mean, I still think in 2020, Trump probably won every state except New York had we had an honest vote. And I think even this time, I would venture to guess his win was 6% greater than what they really were, because there was still a massive amount of fraud in the 2024 election. None of that's acceptable. Until we get paper ballots hand counted and real citizen voter ID, we're going to have a problem. And we've got 2 years to get that done.
There you have it. She is still saying that was recent. It was post 2024 election. I don't know the exact date. She's still saying that Donald Trump won every state but New York. Massive, massive landslide, just as we all knew. And I would suspect that last year, he probably won New York too. Then again, elections are fake, so we may never know what a final result would be. But maybe there's an election system and we can hold a new election and confirm that Trump really does have a vast and overwhelming mandate from the people. We shall see how those things work out. I know that a lot of people are kind of just totally bummed on this issue and have been for a very long time. So I get why people would be hesitant to get their hopes up when it comes to election stuff. But we've talked about these issues. We've tracked things over the past few months that suggest something is coming. We just had the Lindell versus Eric Coomer defamation case like a week ago. Lindell emerged mostly unscathed, got a lot of new information, testimony from Dennis Montgomery. By the way, the lone raccoon, Jeff O'Donnell, who is one of the key players in the PCAP analysis, he's going to be on Why We Vote on Badlands tonight with CanCon and Ash. And I may join them, but I think that's probably unlikely. But they will handle that issue wonderfully, and it'll be great to hear from Jeff O'Donnell. Some of this stuff really seems to be coming to a head, and now Trump is asking for a special prosecutor. Well, earlier in the week, we got this story. FBI raises alarming claims of Chinese interference in 2020 election. This is Newsweek, and we're not going to spend too much time on this, but FBI Director Kash Patel has declassified and shared documents with senators that he says detail alarming allegations about potential Chinese interference in the 2020 election. China has denied any nefarious involvement in swaying the election results in 2020 and again in 2024. Trump allies have alleged that China rigged the 2020 results in Joe Biden's favor, invigorating hardcore supporters to march on the Capitol, leading to the riot on January 6, 2021. And they have to load all of that in there. Trump supporters, of course, were absolutely correct that the 2020 election was rigged. It doesn't matter whether China did it or not, it was rigged. And so when you go into the idea that somehow the supporters were invigorated into marching on the Capitol, leading to a riot, they always have to package in the potential damage that could be caused from doubting our elections. How about the potential damage of our fake elections? Patel shared the update on alleged election fraud in a post on X, formerly Twitter, saying that the CCP and potentially others are alleged to have been involved in interfering with the 2020 election outcome. He also said he turned over documents to Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley. Specifically, Kash says these include allegations of plans from the CCP to manufacture fake driver's licenses and ship them into the United States for the purpose of facilitating fraudulent mail-in ballots. Allegations which, while substantiated, were abruptly recalled and never disclosed to the public. And so that, I believe, is where the heart of that issue would be. Why weren't they disclosed to the public? Is it because something else was going on in the background? And again, this is something that we've been tracking for years, and I've been suggesting for years. There's a lot of evidence that has not been given to the public. Here is one piece of that sort of evidence. Now, we knew about this stuff 5 years ago, or 4.5 years ago, or whatever it was. We were also warned about this happening prior to the election by none other than Donald Trump. Okay, so no one had any reason to doubt these claims. And there are a number of election claims. It's possible that within that full set of election claims, that some of them might be total BS to make people who are interested in election integrity, pursuing the election fraud, to make them look stupid or unserious or undiscerning. And who knows? We could have all been tricked by one or more of those. That's why I don't focus in on the exact claims. The only focus has to be, and I believe that it is a conclusive argument and should be to anyone who considers themselves patriotic and cares about the country, cares about quote unquote democracy, cares about our elections, etc. If it is not provable that the elections were 100% legitimate and that no one is allowed to check, then it's impossible for an election to convey the will and consent of the people to govern. Okay. And at that point, the government is illegitimate. It shouldn't require anything more than that. No one should have any reasonable doubt whatsoever in the outcomes of our elections. But it turns out that everyone in the country at this point, essentially, unless they are totally clueless and maybe totally Trump deranged, although even some of them now are like, our elections are bullshit. And our elections are bullshit. That's the important thing to understand. And once you understand that, it doesn't really matter exactly which claim is up for debate. The elections are illegitimate. The other thing about this specific claim is you have to think about the timing on a release like this. Okay, now people trust Kash Patel over at the FBI. He's been on the team for a really long time. Same thing with John Solomon, who was given this report initially from Just the News. He was a major reporter during Russiagate and all of that, helped uncover the Russian collusion hoax and was connected to Devin Nunes and Kash Patel and the rest of them, a major figure of the Russiagate hoax. So you kind of take both of them at their word with some confidence and some trust in them being on the team and working for the benefit of the country and for MAGA and for Trump, etc. But then you also got to realize that at some point, just like the regime wants to crash the financial system and replace it with a new fiat currency, the other side of that wants to engage in the same crash of the system, although not maybe in the same methods and to the same severity, in order to remove the regime's central banking control over the American dollar, which has been a fiat currency, right? So in both cases, one of them, they want to keep a fiat currency. One of them, we want to get rid of the fiat currency. But in both cases, the inevitable financial collapse or adjustment or disruption or whatever it's going to end up being, that's inevitable down either lane. Okay. I've been saying something very similar about elections for a long time. At some point, the regime is going to want to take down its election system because there's nothing left in it. And it's going to be about what it's replaced with. And so you could imagine at some point, the uniparty then trying to let us know that that election just wasn't on the up and up, and neither was the last one. And then the strategy would be to put an election system in place that will allow them the same level of control, but will convince the public that everything is fine and dandy, and they will all then accept the results of the elections indefinitely. And maybe at some point we just move past elections altogether, but you have to at least be cautious and looking out for the possibility that we could have a series of limited hangouts to convince people that, yes, there's a problem. The problem is not as severe as some people said it was. And here is our solution. Got to be on the lookout for all this stuff, no matter who it's coming from. Okay. And so if you're going to see a Con Inc. Acceptance of election fraud and election malfeasance, it's going to look a lot like it's looked for the last 4.5 years. Little changes being made around the margins within states that don't actually change anything. And even if they change aspects of the election procedures, they don't take the elections from fake to legitimate just with voter ID, for instance, or signature matching, or whatever they're doing in any given state. Speaking of the work in the states, this is from the office of Congressman Abe Hamadeh. You might remember that in 2022, Abe Hamadeh ran for Attorney General of Arizona and lost in an obviously stolen election and contested it, much like Kerry Lake did and others. And those contests kind of went by the boards, and we have had a totally illegitimate government in Arizona now for 2.5 years. I think that all of that will be rectified at some point along similar lines to what we will eventually see with Joe Biden. But none of the people in high office in Arizona were legitimately elected. Their system is one of the worst. But Congressman Abe Hamadeh was successful in his congressional run last year. So he announced on Tuesday that he sent a letter to Attorney General Pam Bondi requesting an investigation into credible claims that an election service provider breached protocols during Arizona's 2024 general election. So just this last election, the one he was elected in. Congressman Hamadeh's request is made as part of his commitment to voters to restore election integrity. Congressman Hamadeh is requesting an examination of, number one, the circumstance surrounding the mixing of blank ballots with voted ballots in the Runbeck warehouse, the security measures in place to prevent such incidents and whether they were followed, the potential impact on the accuracy of election results in Maricopa County and other affected areas, and any other relevant factors that may have compromised the integrity of the 2024 election. And of course, there is no integrity for the 2024 election, just as there was not for 2020. And it's not just me saying that. It's also this guy. Ah, damn it. I thought I had, here we are.
Sports has always been something that Americans rally around to come together. They really do. You won the popular vote. You won all the swing states. But still, Kamala Harris got 75 million votes in the country.
Well, if you believe the whole thing.
Yeah, okay. Let's just say
it is ridiculous.
That the election was as it was.
Excuse me. There are 7 swing states. I won them all.
You did
by a lot.
But let me just get to the dismount here.
And I won the popular.
Have you thought about how to try to bring the country together?
Yes, sir. I can see that you're saying our elections are absolutely fake, but have you thought about how to bring the country together? Hey, Brett, focus on the fake elections. So that's Donald Trump in the Super Bowl interview with Fox News saying that the 2024 election was fake. If you believe the whole thing, then sure, Kamala got 75 million votes, but the whole thing is ridiculous. And it is ridiculous. We just don't believe that as the American people. And I'm talking about consensus, large public consensus, because the TV told us otherwise. There's also this from Scott Besson.
Who was the president in 2024?
One believes President Biden.
One believes? You one of those non-believers that the election, the American people didn't vote?
The American people might have thought they voted, but as we saw in Curling v. Raffensperger, thinking you voted is about all you get. You don't have the right to ensure that your vote is properly counted. So our elections are fake. Donald Trump just said today that we need a special prosecutor to investigate the 2020 election, right? Trump still believes the elections are fake. Is this just kayfabe? Trump's out here telling us elections are fake so that our faith in elections is reduced and we will accept an alternate system. I guess if in the worst possible interpretations of Donald Trump, you could think that, but then Donald Trump would be the one dog walking us into that unimaginable dystopia. And I don't think a lot of people believe Donald Trump is that guy. And I don't believe that. For the people who doubted that 2024's election was fake because Donald Trump was announced by the television as the winner, even though the regime had absolutely no choice other than to do that. And then to believe that the 2024 election being real made the 2020 election real. Well, now you got Donald Trump asking for a special prosecutor. And I hope the great legal minds out there will take it seriously now, rather than simp for the regime so that they themselves might be taken seriously. Hard to do. Sometimes impossible, depending on who we're talking about, you know? Let's keep going with this fake election business, because now we have one of the greatest, funniest things imaginable happening. And that is that the communists have decided that Donald Trump stole the 2024 election from Kamala Harris. Okay. And there's this series of Substack articles by this account called This Will Hold. So you can go to thiswillhold.substack.com and read his articles on the election. I'm going to show you that right here. And I don't know why I'm helping this guy get more Substack views, but I can't imagine anybody's going to be subscribing. Although maybe you want to be entertained by this. So he's done now a series that started on June 11th with She Won. They didn't just change the machines, they rewired the election. Then She Won Part 2, 7 judges, direct to cell satellites, a hijacked election. She Won Part 3, the devil is in the data. And the direct to cell stuff, maybe that'll be really interesting because that sounds like Starlink and T-Mobile. So they have the data, so he says, to prove that the 2024 election was actually stolen by Donald Trump and that Kamala was the real winner. And of course, I commented on this guy's posts, but then I proceeded to get blocked. My first comment, I said to him, you all should demand full forensic audits of every election in every precinct around the country. MAGA will have your back. And he wrote back like, oh yeah, we're going to do it. We have all the data. And I'm like, sure you do, commie. Like if you retards had listened to us back in 2020, maybe we wouldn't be having this problem. Because we, of course, were right about it back then. Now, these people are right that the machines are unreliable, that they're not properly verified, that the elections are not properly run. I'll give them every one of those points. That said, the election was also fake. Kamala Harris was a fake candidate, and there's no way in the world that Kamala Harris was more popular than Donald Trump. And so they've been doing these analyses. And some of the analysis is based on prior election results, which is moronic, right? If our elections are fake, then they're fake. You can't use prior election results to prove that these election results are fake, right? You can use trends and stuff. And I understand that, Seth Keshel does his work partially based on prior election results. I think that there are obviously, as I just said, problems with that approach, right? Like the system, the idea is always that within the fake election, within all of those votes, with the fake ones and the real ones, that somehow underneath that is a real answer. But that's not actually true because there are ballots that are indeterminate, that probably don't represent real people, that will never be able to be proven. You can't actually find that perfect separation. And even if you could get down to only the perfect ballots, you would still have numerous other problems within the system that would just make you throw your arms up in the air or your hands up in the air. I guess throwing your arms up in the air is kind of a weird way of putting that. They're going to be like, he's experiencing cognitive decline. Anyhow, the point is using past elections to suggest that this one, that's just too much of an error. And that's the kind of analysis they're doing. That doesn't work. Okay. The election system should always be the focus. This system cannot produce legitimate, verifiable elections, and therefore all elections held under that system are void. Okay. And you have to understand that. And Trump already does understand that, of course. And so then you have to put it in, you have to frame all of this with the understanding that Trump is the president now and is controlling, or at least is partnering with the American military. The regime side does not seem to have the military support at all, and did not seem to have the military support during what we would describe as the devolution term. Okay. They were the backstop. And that's how I often describe the devolution thing. just as, even John will admit, I don't know that I've got all the details right. I don't know that they'll actually call it devolution, but there's something else going on behind the scenes. And all of this stuff that happened toward the end of the first Trump term indicates that there's something else going on behind the scenes and indicates that they did it by the book according to the laws that were in place. And so if he's done that in partnership with the military, who knows that they can't simply hand the country over to some illegitimate usurper? Well, then what do you do in that situation? You certainly don't allow the usurper to control the military. So one of the president's key functions is already gone under the fake and illegitimate Biden term. And we saw that Biden had no military capacity whatsoever and had no idea what was going on in any military issue around the world at any point. Okay. And it's likely that his administration had no real insight into any of that, although they might have provided some information to get the administration to peddle bad information to make themselves look stupid. I think all of that is entirely plausible and probably happened. So if we have that situation and we have a special prosecutor in place, well, there were Supreme Court cases that we were told were thrown out. There were cases in states around the country, many of which we were told were thrown out, and then some of which just kept going. So you got the cases going, you got a special prosecutor, you got the military providing the backstop, and then Trump ends up back in position in 2024. Everyone believes as the result of a real election, which was clearly not real. And Donald Trump says it. And now even the other side is saying it. The people most resistant to saying it, the conservative establishment, and even many truthers who have made everything about electoral politics, everything about everything done within the controlled opposition dynamic. Everything is against the Democrats. We need to defeat the Democrats. Oh, you need to fall in line in this way or that way. Say this or that. You can't insult that person because we need to defeat the Democrats. All those people just want to acquire power from the Republican establishment, and they have been the biggest roadblocks in actually pushing this stuff forward. Now we actually have more reliable partners, not that we agree on anything principled or will actually partner with them, but by all means push for it. We have people who are pushing for election integrity stronger than many truthers and the Republican establishment among the most Trump deranged liberal lunatics in our country. And hey, sometimes you just got to say, more power to you, guy. Go for it. We will enjoy that. So those articles are ridiculous. And then you've got this, the Common Coalition. So I went to this website earlier today because I wanted to, put this whole segment together, at least in my mind, and be fully familiar with all this stuff. So I look at this website and you see this website and you notice, well, this is a very slick website. This is a well-produced website. This isn't just some website that someone made at home on Wix, most likely. Although, I'm not saying it couldn't be. Maybe it could be. But this is a pretty substantial website. And here is some of the logic. Her rallies were so full. Well, we tracked the rallies the whole time. They were fake the whole time. The huge crowds and all of that joy, says that little graphic there. We voted for her. We know she won. Believe we voted for her. His seats were so empty. Her rallies were so full. Consider what it means that they were shown that by their media and the influencers they follow. They would take those pictures of Trump rallies when the people weren't in the seats and they would say, look how empty these are. But Donald Trump has no problem filling up massive events everywhere in the country. And he hasn't had a problem at any point in the last 10 years. And even just over the weekend, we saw hundreds of thousands of people in Washington, D.C. for the military parade. Donald Trump has massive, overwhelming support everywhere he goes. What are these people talking about? Commie's going to commie. Okay, so they have little action involvement areas here. They go through their history and have sign-up forms and the rest of it on the website. And so I look in their menus because I always want to go to the about sections, figure out who exactly is behind all of these things. Where is the money coming from? And I looked at Influence Watch and they had nothing. And I asked ChatGPT and they had nothing. No one knows. And, I didn't dig on this for hours. So it's possible that I could uncover something at some point. But if you're hiding it already, if you're not putting it out right out in front, then there's something up. And I want to know what that is. And when I look at the strategy here, I cannot rule out that this could be an info op to get Democrats to demand election integrity, because these are the worst arguments you can possibly imagine. Let me see if I can make this present properly. And if it doesn't, then we'll take a different method. It actually says on my screen, processing. So right now we are absolutely holding for processing, but it's not just you. I'm also holding for processing. And while I'm doing that, hey, we got at least one Rumble rant. Let me check, see if there are others so that I can know I'm on a proper pace and tracking all of these. There we are. D-Dub WV APL, if you believe the whole thing. I would guess that Una Panuna is one of the people who does not believe that whole thing, and good for her. Okay, so let's see how this works and whether this will provide me an adequate view of things. I think that I'm going to use a different tactic here so that I can scroll while we roll. Scroll while we roll. I can't, am I tongue twisting myself? Always a terrible idea. Don't tongue twist yourself. Who wants that? Here we are. Hold for processing. This is a terrible hold for processing. All right. So here is their expert report. Okay. The Common Coalition report. We voted for her. All right. The People's Movement, Common Sense, Common Goals, the Common Coalition. The Common Coalition is a grassroots initiative working to inform voters of the statistical anomalies in the 2024 election data, particularly in the swing states and Texas, anomalies that suggest algorithmic interference rather than human behavior. You're speaking my language, commies. Bring it. Our long-term overarching goal is to educate the public on the systemic issues that continue to disenfranchise underserved communities and to advocate for a future in which legislation is driven by the will of the people, the true foundation of a functioning democracy. Really? Is that all you're trying to do? You're trying to protect underserved communities in all this? Why aren't you trying to protect all Americans? Why can't you just say that the American people are the ones who become the victims of a flawed election process? Because we all do. Of course, they can't admit the uniparty. As soon as you admit the uniparty, you understand that elections and election fraud is not Democrat versus Republican or Republican versus Democrat. It's the uniparty against the people. Okay. This is how the uniparty wages war on us and tells us that we are responsible for what they are doing. And our only recourse is to go back and vote again in a fake election. So this would be better if they were actually going after the system. And it doesn't sound like they are, but that's okay. Convince the commies that it must happen, and I will accept that as the most work you could have done. Verifying election integrity through data analysis. The Election Truth Alliance is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization founded in December of 2024 when multiple individuals came together to share independent data, analysis, and research into the results of the 2024 U.S. presidential election. As concerning trends emerged from their shared data and they moved quickly at the speed of trust, at the speed of trust to make their findings more accessible and understandable to the broader public. And so they say, we have the data. The average overperformance of candidate Trump outside the 7 swing states is approximately 2%. If additional overperformance above 2% in the swing states was caused by a vote-changing algorithm, then returning those votes would see candidate Harris winning in 6 of the 7 swing states this calculation can be conducted for. The potential number of votes changed could be close to 1.5 million. This is not including any voter suppression, such as mail-in ballots never being delivered. Okay. And they go in through voter suppression and all of that. They think that that is one of the problems. But what's crazy here is that they are trying to argue that Trump overperformed in these swing states relative to the down ballot results. Okay. Because other Republicans didn't do as well in those places. Donald Trump, therefore, overperformed due to algorithmic manipulation. Now, what did I say throughout all of 2024, understanding the election was going to be fake, understanding that it was just going to be a battle of narratives, understanding that they had to announce Donald Trump as the winner? What were they going to do at that point? Well, they were going to actually try to steal the races down ballot. They were going to make sure that the uniparty was represented down ballot all across the country and at the state level and at the local level. And that is exactly what they did. And because they overperformed, Donald Trump, or they underperformed, sorry, Donald Trump looks as though he overperformed. It's ridiculous. But we are dealing with ridiculous people. The 2024, this is from the report, the 2024 down ballot data across all swing states in Texas reveals voting patterns that are inconsistent with typical human behavior in county after county. Not like that vertical spike on the chart in the middle of the night, not like that kind of obviously not human behavior. This just is inconsistent with typical human behavior. In county after county, one candidate consistently overperforms their party's down ballot candidates by a similar percentage, while the opposing party's candidate underperforms by a nearly identical margin. These anomalies are not present across all states or voting methods, but appear isolated to specific ones. This uniformity is especially concerning as it deviates from expected voter variability and assigns closely with the statistical footprint of a top-of-the-ticket vote flipping algorithm. Okay. Now, I can accept some of their logic, but not the conclusion. Okay. The votes wouldn't have been flipped on the behalf of Donald Trump. They would have been flipped on the behalf of everyone else. Okay. Donald Trump won by far more than what they have him at now. And we remember the day after the election, seeing the response from the media. Oh, Donald Trump had this massive victory. Sorry, I'm trying to do a hold for processing and talk at the same time. But I also said before the election, over time, they are going to reduce that number so that it is very small. So they can say Donald Trump barely won. And look how well we did in all these other races. There is no mandate for Donald Trump. If I could predict that in advance, what are the chances that the election was real? The chances are zero, of course. It was only ever a battle of narratives. It was nothing more than a battle of narratives. Let's look at Trump's current results as they have them listed now. Hold on. I want to get this. Where's our total? Okay, here we are. Here's CNN. Let me just switch over to this for a second. Donald Trump, 77.3 million votes. Kamala Harris, 75 almost 0.1. No, not even. So just basically 75 million. So about 2.3 million vote difference. 48.3% of the popular vote to 49.8. So Donald Trump didn't even get a majority. He only received a plurality of the votes and a very small 1.5 percentage point difference that they believe is being covered by this algorithmic manipulation. That's how Trump won. They can't imagine that a Republican would have won the popular vote. But of course, knowing what we know, having witnessed Joe Biden receiving 81 million real lawful American votes, one election cycle after Hillary Clinton received 15 million fewer votes, totally impossible. Okay. At that point, you have to understand, oh, well, there's at least 15 million votes of fraud just in that. Okay. And so now we are supposed to take those 2020 numbers, take the numbers in 2024, assume that all of that was real and that the one race that was affected was Donald Trump's race. Algorithmic manipulation, by all means, bring it to the forefront. Wow, I can't talk again. Go back and watch Kill Chain. That was all the Democrats arguing that the machines were unreliable, that Donald Trump had stolen the 2016 election, or that it had been stolen on his behalf. Get into all of it. Bring that all out into the public. We'll get on board with every little bit of it. Okay? Algorithmic manipulation, bring it. Wonderful. Let's prove who did it and who it benefited. That would be absolutely perfect. I'll be there every step of the way as they get these things sorted out. Okay. Where are we here? Let's get back to this wonderful report from the Common Coalition. Dr. Walter Mebane. This is his expert analysis. He is a professor in the Department of Political Science and the Department of Statistics at the University of Michigan. Now, the University of Michigan is supposedly a good school. I say supposedly because what's a good school now? Widely regarded as the leading U.S. expert in election forensics, Dr. Walter Mebane's analysis using the e-forensics method has identified an estimated 29,000 fraudulent or distorted votes across 3 Pennsylvania counties. Dr. Mebane's estimate represents close to 24% of the statewide margin of victory in PA. This finding is statistically significant, stemming from just 3 counties, Philadelphia, Allegheny, and Erie, yet representing 24% of Pennsylvania's margin of victory. It raises serious questions about the election outcome. This percentage reflects the lowest, most conservative estimate possible. There are 64 other counties that Dr. Mebane and the Election Truth Alliance are now analyzing. And we've heard claims very similar to this from our own side after the 2020 election. I have no problem with these claims. You are probably right that you can find fraudulent votes in all of these elections. But the chances that all those fraudulent votes were for Donald Trump and that Donald Trump doesn't have a mandate and doesn't have the majority of Americans on his side, well, that's ridiculous. Okay. You can just go around in your normal life and understand that people do not question Donald Trump's legitimacy. And again, if they do, by all means, bring their voices forward, because that will help in the effort of getting our elections sorted out. I have always said from the very beginning, let's get all the cards on the table. Let absolutely every American check our elections in every way imaginable until their little heart's desire, until their little heart's content, I should say. Let's do it. Bring it all out. Put all the cards on the table. I have absolutely no doubt how our viewpoint will be represented in the final results. The truth is, it doesn't matter, because on a very foundational level, it is just power against power. The war is the global regime, the uniparty in the United States versus sovereign nationalists, sovereign nations, sovereign leaders, and sovereign individuals in all of these places all around the world. Donald Trump has the military on his side. He has the American people on his side. The elections, on some level of political realism, are totally meaningless in that circumstance, and they will remain that way. I don't want to linger too long on this report, but multiple avenues through which the 2024 election was compromised, each pointing to a coordinated long-term strategy to manipulate outcomes in key states. Illegal access to voting equipment Had District Attorney Fani Willis not been blocked by a questionable decision from a partisan Georgia appeals court, Americans would have seen compelling evidence that Trump's associates used the big lie narrative to gain unauthorized access to election equipment in Michigan, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Colorado. In some instances, machines were taken to hotels for inspection. Tina Peters, the Colorado official who facilitated this access, was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Tina Peters, I think, will be just fine. And who knows how that op, and it is an op, is going to ultimately unravel. But the idea that they used the big lie to gain unauthorized access is preposterous. And the evidence would not have been in that Fulton County case. First off, because the Fulton County case is fake. Second of all, because they didn't want any evidence to ever be presented, because the evidence wouldn't support their side of things. So again, this is it is a rationally formed argument, but based on totally false principles. And so it would fall apart immediately. Okay. The reasoning makes sense. It's just that the premises are wrong. Coordinated election disruptions via threats. According to the Brennan Center, liberal think tank, at least 227 bomb threats targeted Democratic polling locations, election offices, and tabulation centers nationwide on and after Election Day. Explosive devices detonated on ballot drop boxes across several Pacific Northwest states. And law enforcement was deployed in response to several hoax calls reporting active shooters at schools serving as polling sites in the Northeast. Okay. Did Trump or MAGA people do any of that? Well, obviously not. Or we would have heard prosecutions. We would have heard talk about prosecutions immediately while Joe Biden was still pretending to be president. And we didn't hear any of this stuff. I mean, yes, there were reports in the news about bomb threats. Bomb threats are the easiest false flag, fake info op you can imagine. It doesn't even take the phone call. It only takes the report of a phone call to have a bomb threat. Doesn't take a bomb. Doesn't take a phone call. Just a report of a phone call suggesting there might be a bomb somewhere. And then that counts. And so then the Brennan Center can compile all of these things, which are just normal parts of the Color Revolution playbook. And they can release a report that suggests because there were these bomb threats, you should take by implication it was Trump supporters making these bomb threats in order to influence the election outcome through voter suppression. The people being suppressed in this instance would be people going to vote in person, even though they make mail-in balloting the thing for their side and available to all of their people. Okay. So the people that have to go vote in person, that's who these threats were designed to suppress. This just takes all of that as a given. Totally irrational. Corporate acquisition of election infrastructure. And we'll stop after this. Actually, you know what? I want to go to one more page after this. In 2021, Trip Light, a company certified to maintain over 70% of U.S. election equipment, was sold by far-right judicial architect Leonard Leo to Eaton Corporation. Eaton Corp had previously partnered with Palantir, co-developing AI-driven supply chain systems effectively linking Peter Thiel to the nation's voting infrastructure. Well, does it do that? Do they believe that Thiel is still connected to our election systems? And why does that matter if Dominion is just straight up owned by by Mark, State Street Capital or something, with Mark Malek Brown on their board, George Soros' guy? That's not a problem. We can't question election integrity under those circumstances, but the connection to Palantir is decisive. By 2024, Eaton expanded its work with Palantir to include AI-powered management, migration, and cleansing of large data sets, raising questions about the potential application to sensitive election data. Yeah, before that, it was just kept on systems that could be accessed by the people who run elections and never checked by anyone else. Way better. Then just 2 months before the election, Eaton entered a strategic partnership with Tesla to supposedly streamline home energy deployments, integrating Eaton's infrastructure into Elon Musk's corporate web, providing cover for financial and technological coordination. So they're getting right to the heart of things, and they're suggesting Palantir's involvement, which is very interesting considering that they are a defense contractor. They go into data harvesting and algorithmic manipulation, satellite-based MITM interference, man-in-the-middle network interference from the satellite with the direct-to-cell capability. Gotta love it. Disinformation campaigns on X. And I would suggest that this Stingray device above voting precincts that they mentioned, that could just be tracking the elections to monitor the algorithmic manipulation coming from elsewhere. Mike Lindell talked about that exact strategy for a really long time. He used to go out on Bannon and elsewhere and say, I've got the way that we can keep the election secure. And it was basically that. So got to think that there's something there, but I don't think that they're going to work that out quite right. The Doge boys, these are the hackers who made all of this possible. Okay, so now it's directed at them. This is the page that I absolutely love. Investigative journalist Greg Palast has extensively reported on voter suppression in U.S. elections, particularly highlighting its impact on the 2024 presidential race. His findings detail several mechanisms of voter suppression in the 2024 election. And here's what they have. Voter roll purges. Approximately 4.78 million voters were reportedly removed from registration databases, often without adequate notice or justification. Okay, you can say that it's often without adequate notice or justification, but we know that states have overinflated voter rolls that include hundreds of thousands or millions of ineligible or inactive voters. So purging those is not voter suppression. In fact, the purge was not even close to being big enough. The solution, because we care about solutions, right? I'm not trying to take advantage of these commies. You don't need to do that. You can defeat communists just by speaking the truth. Okay. So we don't need to vie for some special advantage. We don't need to cheat them in any way whatsoever. We can just go about our business honestly, demand honesty from everyone else, and we'll be just fine. Okay. But the solutions-oriented approach to the voter registration databases is to eliminate all voter registrations and start again from zero. Okay. Until that happens, we cannot have clean and legitimate voter rolls. It is a necessary step in all of this. Again, it's not just enough to eliminate mail-in balloting or eliminate the machines or put in voter ID. All those are good steps, but they don't get us there. Okay. We need to get all the way there so that elections can actually be trusted, understanding that the manipulation of voter rolls and the inflation of those voter rolls is one of the key aspects of the election fraud apparatus, means that the whole thing has to be eradicated. Every name has to be removed. Go back to zero and then start your database from there. Or don't have a database. Don't make people register to vote. Make them show up to vote on the day of the vote, on the day of the election, with their voter ID, if that's that's the direction we choose, and make sure that they can only vote once. And if they vote more than once, there's a severe penalty for doing that. And everybody has to go vote in person on the same day. All right. We don't need voter registration at that point. If you have a valid and legitimate license that can be checked, I guess there's got to be some database of people who are actually citizens or something for verification. And who knows if that's going to be the real ID thing or whatever else. We've discussed that before. But that's incredible, right? This is the voter roll purges of the inflated voter rolls is being treated as voter suppression by this common coalition. Let's keep going. Mail-in ballot disqualifications. Over 2.1 million mail-in ballots were disqualified due to minor clerical errors such as missing signatures or postage issues. There were probably not enough mail-in ballots rejected. They don't care about following the law. And we've always known this. And they don't make any bones about it. Okay. It's not like I'm trying to insult them, or I'm out of bounds making this claim. They don't care about what the actual election laws, rules, regulations state. They believe that the highest priority above and beyond everything else is that everybody who wants to vote can vote. And that includes illegal aliens and people not eligible to vote. It includes felons, etc. They want everybody to vote or to be able to vote. And so anything that will get rid of voter registrations or disqualify a mail-in ballot because it doesn't comply with the standards, that's voter suppression. Well, that's not. They're just asking to have an allowance to not actually follow the rules in their particular cases because we have this other outside priority that is not the legal priority. It's not even a moral priority. The standard should be to maximize for integrity and legitimacy, not to maximize for the top line total number of votes. Provisional ballot rejections. Around 1.2 million provisional ballots were rejected, frequently affecting voters who face challenges at polling stations. And that's probably low too, because again, this is just another means of cheating elections. New voter registration issues, an estimated 3.24 million new voter registrations were either rejected or not processed in time for the elections. Too bad, so sad. All of the election systems have to be stripped down to the very basic, and when it comes to registrations, to absolutely nothing. So more stringent standards on voter registrations. Why were those registrations rejected? Were they automatically filed from the DMV and then determined to be representing an illegal alien who can't vote? Probably. That's what the motor voter laws do. They make it so that people go in, any illegal alien who goes in for a driver's license, and I've seen this before because I have registered for a driver's license in California before. There's a little check mark. Are you a citizen of the United States? And if someone is helping them and filling those things out and presses that button for them, or it's just in some file where that is automatically happening, well, then a voter registration is created for that illegal alien. That illegal alien doesn't know it. They're never going to go vote. They're never going to get a ballot, but there they are. The ballot can be printed for them by Runbeck, filled out somewhere, given back to Runbeck, and Runbeck operates with the postal carriers. The system is crazy. And yes, they set that system up to be able to cheat in elections. And again, the deeper truth is that elections are fake. The entire process with all the ballots and the counting and all the rest of it, that is just the psyop to make that is all of the real world stuff necessary to make the psyop effective. Okay. They're essentially backfilling the votes they need to produce the results they have already determined. Okay. All right. We will leave that report behind, although keep it in mind, keep all of these court issues and the election stuff in mind as we go through these next couple issues, because we're talking censorship again. And that's a big deal when big things are happening. Okay. They want to be able to censor on certain issues. We saw it in 2020. They wanted to be able to censor when it comes to COVID. They wanted to be able to censor when it comes to the Summer of Love and the BLM Antifa domestic terrorism. They wanted to be able to censor when it comes to the fake election and everything that followed it. They wanted to be able to censor when it came to January 6th. They wanted to be able to censor when it came to vaccine mandates. Okay. And the Ukraine war. And we can just go on and on. Every one of the big issues, they have wanted to be able to censor the American people. On one side, they have propaganda, the social media operations, the bot armies, the influence, the algorithms, etc. But when all of that stuff fails, at the end of that, they need censorship. Here is one: Barack Obama, former illegitimate president. What's going to happen when we get the Obama birth certificate issue all straightened out?
But part of what we're going to have to do is to start experimenting with new forms of journalism and how do we use social media in ways that reaffirm facts, separate facts from opinion. We want diversity of opinion. We don't want diversity of fact. By the way, it will require some government, I believe, some government regulatory constraints around some of these business models in a way that's consistent with the First Amendment, but that also says, look, there is a difference between these platforms letting all voices be heard versus a business model that elevates the most hateful voices or the most polarizing voices or the most dangerous in the sense of inciting violence voices. And that I think is going to be a big challenge for all of us that we're going to have to undertake.
All right. So he's asserting that Twitter, I mean, that's got to be what he's referring to, amplifies and elevates the most hateful and dangerous and most violence inciting voices. It definitely amplifies some of those people because those people are part of an info op. But I was banned on Twitter for 2 years. And when I came back, I was suspended like 12 times in 15 months. And then once I deactivated my account, Twitter allowed my account to be accessed by someone else who basically deleted all my stuff, all my followers, all my posts, all of it. And now Twitter won't give me the account back because they say I can't verify that it's my account, even though, of course, I have the payment records, the email, the phone number, everything about the account I have. So is Twitter really amplifying voices that Barack Obama would have a problem with? I would say no. And very few things could be more obvious. Now, he gets to portray the situation as that because Twitter does amplify major parts of Con Inc. Of course, they're part of the Uniparty, and he's ultimately being helped by them, but they're playing a perfect controlled opposition for an issue like this. He can say, look at all these people who are amplified by that platform. Look at all these people who are reposted by Elon Musk. That's why we need the censorship. He's saying that the government should have some involvement of that while respecting the First Amendment. The freedom of speech shall not be infringed. I don't know what's confusing about that. The government doesn't have a right to censor. He said he wants diversity of opinion, not diversity of fact. Well, then who's going to be the ultimate arbiter of fact? We don't have that. The courts pretend to be that in court cases, but they're not the ultimate arbiter of fact in an epistemological sense, right? You can't know that something is true because some authority has said it's true. There has to be a connection to reality that is deeper than what some supposedly authoritative source has said. So what does he mean that he doesn't want diversity of facts? Once they declare something a fact, that's it. Anything that attempts to refute that is disallowed. And we saw that throughout COVID. Trust the experts, trust the science, trust the doctors. These are your authoritative sources. They convey the facts. If you are disputing them, then you are misinforming people. You become dangerous. You could kill someone's grandma, and therefore you have to be censored. This is exactly the same argument. They have not advanced on this at all. And so why is it coming back around? Why are we dealing with the censorship issues? And I would suggest that it's because they need it. They need it for Israel. They need it for elections, most particularly. And I would imagine they'll probably need it for birthright citizenship. I know that when we talk about dates, it's always annoying. You get your hopes up and then something doesn't happen. I understand. Okay. But this is one of those periods where you could expect significant ramping up in a variety of areas. And, we're in the midst of an increase in kind of the activity along all these lines throughout this new Trump term. But with Supreme Court decisions coming out, with election fraud beginning to reach a fevered pitch, with the Israel thing falling apart, which is one of the absolute pillars of the global regime. It's one of their purposes in this world to create the conflict they're attempting to create now, because they are attempting to portray to the world that prophecies have been fulfilled and that the Messiah will come down, the one who the Jews will finally accept, which is the inversion of Jesus as Messiah. And that would be the Antichrist. And so they've got bewildered Scofield Bible downstream American evangelicals totally on board with that project, which is wild. But whatever it is, they need to keep that project going. That is beyond everything else. And the fact that people are able to communicate about what's happening in Israel right now and has been for the last 2.5 years and how that situation is going to end up, that's a good cause for censorship from their perspective. Let us take a brief pause and hit a Rumble ad. I myself am a big coffee fan, or I have been at times in my life. I'm not currently drinking coffee, but I will be. I still drink decaf sometimes, but I'm going to be back to it sooner or later. And 1775 coffee is awesome. If you still haven't tried it, now's your chance to get the 1775 starter kit. You're getting the bold dark roast that hits harder than a CNN fact check, the smooth medium roast, and the Vitality mushroom coffee for clean energy and laser focus. No crash. All single origin, small batch, toxin free, and mold free. Plus, you're also getting a gold spoon clip because freedom isn't scooped with plastic. A frother strong enough to stir up your coffee and your mother-in-law's political opinions, and a black 1775 tumbler that says, "I don't take life advice or caffeine from a woke sea witch." $170 worth of coffee and gear, yours for only $99. This is for the ones who've been watching 1775 blow up on Rumble, wondering if it's actually worth it. Spoiler alert, it is. Go to 1775coffee.com/studio, grab your starter kit before they're gone. Bold beans, clean fuel, and a morning routine that stands for something, just like Rumble does. Start your day with coffee that actually backs what you believe. Okay. Let's go to this one just quickly. California judge stops Trump administration from firing internet speech police. How about that? Secretary of State Marco Rubio declared in April that the Counter Foreign Information Manipulation and Interference Hub, the RFIMI, was dead. Because of legal interference, it turns out that for now, RFIMI, formerly Global Engagement Center, is only mostly dead. Through the miraculous powers of an activist judge, San Francisco's senior district judge, Susan Ilston, ordered Friday that the Trump administration must not dismantle RFIMI, the creepy censorship arm within the State Department that curtails free speech. Okay? So let's just think about what this judge has done. California, I just want to make sure I'm saying this, San Francisco's senior district judge. Okay, so a district judge has told the president that he cannot remove an agency under the State Department over which he has plenary purview and plenary authority to do whatever he wants. The State Department has to execute the president's agenda. That's the constitutional system, okay? This district judge is telling the president that he cannot eliminate this agency from under the State Department, even though the agency's purpose is to systematically violate the First Amendment. That's incredible. Let's keep going. The argument continues over whether the president has the authority to reorganize the federal workplace and trim excess employees, or if only unelected local judges have that authority for the entire nation. In her June 13th order, Ilston said the State Department's planned employee separations from RFIMI are prohibited by a previous injunction, And if the State Department plans any other similar actions, it better check with Judge Ilston first. If the State Department has any questions about whether planned actions fall within the scope of the court's injunction, the court orders the department to first raise those questions with the court before taking action. How about no? Carrie Lake dealing with propaganda as well. This is Eric Doherty, one of the paid conning influencers on X, formerly Twitter. Breaking: Carrie Lake mass terminates 85% of positions at the U.S. Agency for Global Media. 1,400 total. This is Carrie Lake's letter. Oh, it's not going to let me expand that. One second here. All right. In accordance with President Trump's executive order dated March 14th, titled Continuing the Reduction of the Federal Bureaucracy, U.S. Agency for Global Media has completed a significant workforce reduction, eliminating 1,400 positions, an 85% decrease in personnel since March. Today, we took decisive action to effectuate President Trump's agenda to shrink the out-of-control federal bureaucracy. Reduction in force termination notices were sent to 639 employees at USAGM and Voice of America, part of a long overdue effort to dismantle a bloated, unaccountable bureaucracy. For decades, American taxpayers have been forced to bankroll an agency that's been riddled with dysfunction, bias, and waste. That ends now. I'm proud to carry out President Trump's executive order and deliver results that put America first. And good for her. Again, this is just another one of the regime's propaganda arms that operated under the U.S. government around the world to distribute propaganda. We don't need that. We shouldn't want that. We wouldn't want other countries distributing their propaganda here, right? And we prevent that in certain ways, but we also want the right to be able to propagandize other countries. And part of that is because we were the kind of avatar, the home base of the global regime broadly. And so in all its other proxy states, it needs to be fed American and American style media to keep the regime's arguments at the forefront. Okay. Let's get into some geopolitical issues. Checking the chats just real quick here. Everybody seems like they are doing okay, but hey, I got to read these things pretty fast, you know? Otherwise, I'm just scrolling and reading forever. Dave says, don't get me started on the Scofield Bible business. Everyone should understand the Scofield Bible business and think about the effects that it has had over the course of now well over a century. Inverting, much as the Constitution was inverted during the Civil War. In fact, Fletcher argues that the Civil War was fought specifically to make those changes to the Constitution, not over slavery or anything else, to make those changes to the Constitution. So just as that was inverted, you can invert the Bible by changing its meaning in people's minds as they receive it. And when that education has kind of been saturated throughout certain sects of the Christian population, and it's into the theological seminaries where the pastors learn what the Bible means and learn how to speak about the Bible. And then they take that out into churches and create mega churches that are allowed to get massive. What is all of that? Okay. If you are disseminating that information to virtually all of mainstream Christianity, and everybody just believes that's actually what the Bible says, despite the fact that they are regurgitating an inversion of what the Bible says, well, that's going to be a very effective strategy, much like it was with the Constitution. We now have the society that is the product of the inverted Constitution. We now have the society that is the product of the inverted understanding of the Bible. And I think that that is an absolutely critical issue. And the more people understand that, and speak out, the better off we are. Checking on chats over on Substack and over on YouTube. Hello to all of you. And I don't know how much this matters for a small show like mine. Maybe someday it'll be a big show. 5 years later. But we have a good niche. We have a good niche. I'm not complaining. Trust me. Just saying. I don't know how much the thumbs up matters on a show like mine, but if you're watching on Rumble or on YouTube and you can take 2 seconds to hit the thumbs up, at least theoretically, that will help. And I doubt that it is too bothersome for anyone to go ahead and do that. Okay, so now let's get into the geopolitics. I think I probably played this the other day, but I just want to set it up one more time. This is Donald Trump talking about Russia's exclusion from the G8 when he was at the G7 on Monday.
Well, I look forward to that. The G7 used to be the G8. Barack Obama and a person named Trudeau didn't want to have Russia in. And I would say that was a mistake, because I think you wouldn't have a war right now if you had Russia in. And you wouldn't have a war right now if Trump were president 4 years ago. But it didn't work out that way. But it used to be the G8, and now it's, I guess, what's that, 8 years ago, it switched over. They threw Russia out, which I claimed was a very big mistake. Even though I wasn't in politics then, I was very loud about it. It was a mistake in that you spend so much time talking about Russia, and he's no longer at the table, so it makes life more complicated. But you wouldn't have had the war. Other than that, I think we're going to accomplish a lot.
So Trump reiterates that there would have been no Russia-Ukraine war had Trump been president. Of course, it was a fake election. Trump backed off. Military still behind Trump. Something's going on in the background, and the Russia-Ukraine war narrative plays out. The regime could have simply submitted and allowed Trump to continue on as president and do what he needed to do. But of course, they would never do that, because that would be their death, essentially, in terms of their system. I don't mean that every single person would have died, obviously. So they can't allow that. They have to figure out a way to make Russia look bad, to make Trump look bad, to create all sorts of chaos, to be able to push money around where they need it, and to make it so that the American people won't accept Donald Trump back. And they tried really, really hard at that. And they tried really hard with the Ukraine war. But the truth is that if Donald Trump was president and he and Putin could have come to terms, if the regime could have relinquished their control over their proxy state in Ukraine, which obviously they wouldn't do, then none of it would have been necessary. But they chose not to do that. They chose to go along and push forward with stolen elections, with the deep state entrenched, with the way that they control society, with the way that they control the states. And so we were left with the stories that we have been told. This is Vladimir Putin on the same subject.
Also on many occasions said that if I were the president, there would be no war in Ukraine. And he's right in this regard. And I will tell you why. Because in one of our latest conversations with President Biden, I told him that, well, I'm not going to speak about the details of that conversation, but I told him that we must not bring it to the phase of armed conflict. We need to resolve it via peaceful means, and we need to make the current Ukrainian authorities to satisfy the demands of the citizens who live in the east of the country, to stop the genocide of the Russian speakers, to stop violating human rights there. Something the previous administration mentioned, the human rights authorities mentioned a lot of time.
So Putin agrees that if Donald Trump had, won the 2020 fake election, then there would have been no war. So Trump says it and Putin says it. Pretty simple. So who is the cause of that war? Well, it's the global regime, and we've always known that. And getting Putin's agreement on that, I think is, it's not like the most important thing in the world or anything, but it is good that they are totally aligned on that viewpoint. And of course they are, because they are the people who actually settle these things out. And of course, as you know, I believe firmly all this stuff was already in place before Trump left after the first term. Or I should say, stepped off stage temporarily after the first term. There's also this from Vladimir Putin, and I'm going to have to do the thing where I turn it down and attempt to do the subtitles over it. So bear with me for just a second. All right. I just want to push the volume here down. You spoke about the regions in Ukraine that we consider ours. I've already said many times that I consider the Russian and Ukrainian people to be one people in reality. In this sense, all of Ukraine is ours. And yeah, I mean, he's right. It's going to be theirs. I would still be shocked if Ukraine remains a fake country after all of this is wrapped up. And he's said elsewhere that he would love to get a deal and get the deal done, but that only Ukraine's legitimate powers could sign off on any deal. And I guess the indication there is that Zelensky is not one of those. Now, we know Zelensky canceled elections and is, May of last year, he's already been serving for an extra year plus as a totally illegitimate president. But then again, it's fake country. So who is the war against? The war is against the global regime. Vladimir Putin is dealing with the global regime. The negotiations are not between Ukraine and Russia. They're not between Ukraine and Russia facilitated by Trump. They are the sovereign leaders, Trump and Putin, and who knows about Zelensky's, how that'll ultimately turn out, but against the global regime, because they have to relinquish their control. And we talked about that extensively with the International Crisis Group report and the fact that their European backers are really the power players in that situation, not Volodymyr Zelensky. Okay, so the European backers, that's the regime. And they're going to be the ones who ultimately have to surrender at some point. And again, the other day, I would suggest that Trump's unconditional surrender statement is more directed at them than it is at the Ayatollah, although their back and forth online serves to keep the whole issue moving along. All right, so let's spend a little time on Israel and Iran, and then we will get out of here, and I will wish you all a very happy weekend. So this is the Wall Street Journal from yesterday. This is their editorial board. So all of the very serious intellectuals at the Wall Street Journal get together and decide this is what we have to say. One or a couple of them write it out and they all sign on. We all agree. MAGA's misguided isolationists. The press is full of reporting on the MAGA civil war over Iran, but what's notable is that the loudest isolationists appear to be losing the debate. It's worth considering how they've misread the historical moment, the views of most Republicans, and above all, President Trump. And I just realized that I did not share this. So there's that. So you understand that? Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, people like me, we don't understand Trump. We don't understand the views of most Republicans, and we've misread the historical moment. I will suggest all of that is false. Start with the threat and the mission. Like leftists after Vietnam, the new right isolationists see every U.S. military intervention as a slippery slope to disaster. That's because A, they are, and B, when they're premised on absolute falsehoods, why should we think they are anything else? It's not that we're anti-war. We're not pacifists. We're not leftists. In fact, we're battling against leftists. Neoconservatives and neoliberals are leftists. They are statists. They are collectivists. What else could they be? Instead of Vietnam syndrome, they suffer from Iraq syndrome. Every U.S. intervention will turn into a quagmire of nation building or even catastrophe. Okay, so you've already named 2 of those where that's happened. And you could also then name Afghanistan, right? Ukraine is something of a catastrophe. Which wars weren't catastrophes? And we're told World War I and World War II were not catastrophes. In fact, we won. And in some sense, from the regime's perspective, that is exactly right. They were able to get their proxy state in the Middle East so they could continue on with the rest of the Zionist project. That's what World War I was designed to do. The U.S. became involved in World War I because of the Balfour Declaration and because of the leverage that was put on by Zionists. Same thing with World War II. And the purpose was to create the proxy state of Israel, which they did in partnership with the Nazis. Okay? I don't know how that just disappeared. My screen share is running away. It's like, no, don't talk about the Nazis. Skipping down a bit. Wars are unpredictable and always come with risks, but that must be contemplated. But so far, Israel is winning this fight without regional, much less global escalation. And they're just saying Israel's winning this fight. The entire thing is nonsense. Iran has fired back at Israel with decreasing missiles by the day, while Russia and China steer clear. Military conflict is not a solution, Chinese President Xi Jinping said Tuesday. And that's just fine. Okay. So Russia and China are not getting involved, even though they have the back of Iran. Why aren't they doing that? Well, they must not be too concerned about what's happening so far. We also see video every day, and I don't trust any of this video. I don't trust any of the reporting, but in a narrative understanding of how things are going, to say that Israel is winning while we're also getting stories about how Israel is being bombed. There's this huge explosion today at Haifa and Beersheba. Somebody can correct me on the pronunciation there. But they have all these targets in Israel. So apparently the Iron Dome isn't working. The very real Iron Dome isn't working. The isolationists are unwilling to make distinctions and treat each intervention on its own terms. In Iran's case, no one is talking about putting U.S. troops on the ground or a military occupation, and they should add yet. Nor is anyone asking the U.S. to do the heavy lifting or take the biggest risk, and I don't know how they're possibly saying that with a straight face. The U.S. is supposed to do the critical bombing run to take the big bunker buster, and they decided, by the way, that the bunker buster's not going to work. They're actually going to need a tactical nuclear strike to eliminate Fordo. So we are going to have to take our magical bomb, put it on our invisible plane, and then drop it on Iran's super secret underground lair where they are conjuring a similar magical bomb. That's the whole story. Top Gun run in, just like Top Gun Maverick, hitting this impossible target. You're only going to get one chance. You got to strike this thing. And if you don't do it, the whole world's going to end. That's where we are with this. And that would be the heavy lifting, and it would be the biggest risk, because otherwise the indication is that the heavy lifting has already been done by Israel. Well, that's not the case, because they have no way of finishing the job, which is why people like Steve Bannon keep taunting them by telling them to finish the job. This is the dirty work that Israel does for all of us, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said Tuesday. So the German Chancellor is suggesting that what Israel is doing is actually for everyone. And who does he mean by all of us? Well, that can't be everyone in the world, right? Because Iran has allies. Iran's not threatening China or Russia. They are just supposedly threatening Israel. They're not threatening Europe. They're not threatening the United States, although we're told that they chant death to America, and it's reiterated here. And that's enough for us to feel threatened. The U.S. mission would be adding aerial firepower that Israel doesn't have, and that America has resisted selling it to destroy buried nuclear sites. The U.S. wouldn't be starting a war, but trying to finish it sooner by neutralizing a nuclear threat from a regime that chants death to America. That's all we need to know. They say magical bomb, they're going to get a magical bomb, and they don't like us. They say death to America. Therefore, we need to bomb the ever-loving shit out of them. Iran's Ayatollah Khomeini resisted Mr. Trump's terms on Wednesday and said any U.S. military intervention will undoubtedly cause irreparable harm to them. We went over that the other day. Let's jump down to the end here. General Eric Kurilla, the top U.S. commander in the Middle East, told Congress on June 10th that Israel had weakened Iran. Really? On June 10th, he said that, huh? I thought they didn't strike Iran till the night of the 12th here, which was the 13th over there, Friday the 13th. There has rarely been a time with greater opportunity to protect national interests in the Middle East, but only if we have the courage. Okay, sorry. Just wanted to make sure that I was not missing where the end of this was. Mr. Carlson now labels Mr. Trump complicit and urges the U.S. to drop Israel, which seems to be Mr. Carlson's overriding priority, as it is for a great many of us, actually. Another podcaster calls for Mr. Trump's impeachment. Their fellow travelers warned that U.S. action would split the MAGA base, but in the real world, Trump supporters seem to be rallying behind the president. Yes, we're rallying behind the president. We're not rallying behind Israel, and we're not rallying behind Trump going into a war. Trump says different things about the situation. We still support Trump, but not that piece. So splitting the MAGA base, no. Splitting the MAGA base off from the Republican establishment, yes. And we're all about that. That's wonderful. Calling for Trump's impeachment is ridiculous. That is another podcaster. I don't know who that is, but that's obviously retarded. Is it a priority to drop Israel, to make it so that the United States no longer prioritizes defending Israel above all else? Yeah, that's a priority. And they would then say, well, you're basically then asking for Israel to be wiped off the map. Well, if a nation state can't defend itself without causing world wars, of which they've already caused two, and this one being the third, then maybe they shouldn't exist. Okay. I don't really have a dog in that fight. If Israel is still a state after all this is said and done, fine. Two-state solution, fine. But if they're not, that's fine too. Just like it's fine if Ukraine is no longer a state after this, or Taiwan is no longer a state after this, or Guyana is no longer a state after this. It's okay if they all are, as long as the people are there and supporting a sovereign country, as long as the people are on board with it. You know, it doesn't matter how the global regime's maps are drawn. You change the name of a country to something else, everything else stays the same except for the system of governance, and the regime government is removed. That sounds like a win. Okay. So it's not that I want Israel gone, and it's certainly not got anything to do with normal Jews just practicing their faith, but the global regime has a proxy state on land that they took by force and manipulation. That doesn't have to just last there forever. And as far as the enduring biblical Israel, well, that's the Christian diaspora. So that's not going anywhere. It's just this global regime proxy state that assumed the name of Israel so that they could get credit for everything that the biblical Israel represents. And if you want to talk about just the land, well, there are other countries in that region that occupy biblical Israeli, or the land of biblical Israel. Okay. I think Egypt has some of it, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria. Could any of them today change their name to Israel and then be counted as the biblical Israel, like the current proxy state of Israel is and does? I don't think so. I don't think anybody would take that seriously. Certainly nobody would be like, oh, well, now, I mean, now that Saudi Arabia has changed the name of part of their land to Israel, we have to defend that land at all costs whenever whoever's there tells us that we have to, along with all the world's bankers, the world's media, etc. It's such a preposterous and stupid notion. I can't believe that there are actually people making these arguments and being taken seriously for them. And then, of course, also getting incredibly offended if anybody ever challenges that viewpoint and that perspective, which is a ridiculous one. Let's close this out. Most Republicans like and support Israel from long cultural, democratic, and strategic affinity. You can certainly say that. They also understand the danger from a nuclear Iran. You can certainly say that too. A JL Partners survey who finds MAGA Republicans support U.S. strikes on Iran by more than 3-1. I have not seen polling that reflects that. I've seen polling that reflects the exact opposite. A poll by Gray House, again, who finds 83% of Trump voters support Israel's strike and 73% say Iran can't be trusted to honor an agreement. Well, that doesn't mean we want the U.S. to bomb them, does it? A fair conclusion from the IAEA reports on 20 years of Iranian nuclear deception, lies, and cover-ups. And who knows whether or not any of that is true, like what the status of Iran's efforts toward a magical bomb have actually been. J.D. Vance, who has long courted MAGA's isolationists, explained in an X post Tuesday why Mr. Trump, quote, may decide he needs to take further action to end Iranian enrichment. And that, of course, is meaningless. He seems to know which way the White House wind is blowing. And they keep pushing this line that Trump is going to do this. Sooner or later, he's going to do this. And they have to create that reality. And they have to talk that reality into existence so that people in MAGA will say, well, you know, Trump's going to be doing this, so I guess we better find a way to support it, rather than what we should be doing, which is saying repeatedly in every possible venue, no. We are not defending Israel. We are not going to bomb Iran. We're not starting a war with one of the superpower militaries in the world who just happen to be backed by China and Russia. No, we're not doing that. Okay. That's the only message that needs to go out, which is why the media wants us to understand Trump's actually going to do this. So if you're going to stay on board with Trump, well, you got to be on board with that. And that's the tactic to split the MAGA base. Mr. Trump sees himself as peacemaker, but that is no contradiction with wanting to deny a nuclear bomb to a theocratic Iranian regime. On that point, he has been consistent since before he entered politics. The inconsistencies lie with the isolationists, so traumatized by Iraq and Afghanistan, that they would let a revolutionary regime go nuclear in the name of peace. I am not convinced, and this is going to be one of those statements that makes people mad. It's all good. I'm not convinced any longer that Iran is the threat that they make it out to be. Not even a little bit, okay? Because the people who describe Iran as that threat are the very same people who have lied about absolutely all of the rest of it, including our elections, okay? The Wall Street Journal editorial board cannot be trusted on anything. Neither can the rest of the mainstream media. Neither can the neocons and the neoliberals. Neither can the foreign policy establishment. And neither can the TV generals. None of these people can be trusted on the identification of our enemies. Okay. And even if they could be, we would not have to agree with them because we have no rationale as to why we should. We just keep hearing that they chant death to America. Oh, they violate women's rights. Can't you see the women out there protesting because of their haircuts or whatever? Yeah, that's color revolution. Okay. They wage color revolutions. There's a color revolution right now against Benjamin Netanyahu. There's a color revolution against Donald Trump. There's a color revolution in Iran. There are color revolution tactics used in Russia. That's what Alexei Navalny was there for. And if you're not familiar with that story, I did 3 episodes in a row, like exclusively on Alexei Navalny, because it is such a clear model for how they attempt to overthrow regimes, create shadow governments, try to convince the rest of the world that the shadow government is legitimate, and then continue moving forward. They've already got the person to replace the Ayatollah with, which is the son of the Shah who was deposed in 1979. And that guy's lived in America for like the last 4 decades. Why? Probably because he was brought over here by the regime and given a nice, safe, very comfortable life in America. Now he's going to go back and run Iran, and we're just supposed to believe that that's what the Iranian people really want. All of it premised on the very, very badness of the Ayatollah and the Iranian regime. You got to make them prove it harder than that. I don't believe that at all. I don't believe them at all. And I don't need to be an expert on Iran to understand that. Okay. It is simple, deductive logic based on first principles. If you stick to first principles, we don't know anything about that regime in Iran. Okay. We do know that the people who have identified that regime as a pariah state and one of our greatest enemies are the same people who lie about everything else. They did the same thing with Putin, with Kim Jong-un, we'll see with Xi. They do the same thing with people like Bolsonaro and Viktor Orban. They did the same thing with Mohammed bin Salman. Remember when they tried to say Mohammed bin Salman ordered Jamal Khashoggi to be captured and then chopped up into little pieces? These people are insane, okay? They love war. To the extent that the regime controls virtually all mainstream media, and they do, then who is speaking through these people? Well, it's that global regime with their most critical proxy state, the centerpiece of their project, potentially being diminished, not only in a real legal formal sense, but also in the eyes of the world, in the narrative generally, so that people actually are no longer thinking, oh, well, yeah, of course we have to protect Israel because of our religious beliefs or because they're our greatest ally or all this other bullshit. Like they're good relative to Iran. Iran's very bad. So what we need is a democracy in the Middle East to protect us from the Iranian threat that would definitely reach our shores. If it weren't for Israel, what? These people are insane. Don't believe them about anything. And when you see an argument made like that one that requires them to be telling the truth about the Iranian regime, who they are and what they represent, well, since you can't establish that, the rest of the argument immediately collapses, right? Think about it as like a Jenga tower, okay? And you've got this argument. They need you to get to the top level, which is we have to send our magical bomb on a Top Gun Maverick mission into Iran so they can drop that magical bomb on Iran's super secret underground lair where they are conjuring their own magical bomb, and assuming everything goes perfectly, their magical bomb will not come into existence. That's the top of the Jenga tower. Okay. And at the very bottom of the Jenga tower is Iran is a brutal, evil regime who's mean to women and chants death to America. And as soon as you're like, really? And you pull out one, it's like, it just gives that little wobble. It's not really falling over. And then you see the block that represents Iran is about to get a nuclear bomb, as they have been for the last 30 years. Well, you pull that out, wobble. You don't have a whole lot more wobbling you can do before the entire tower falls down. Nothing else has strengthened it. They need you to get all the way up to that top level, and the entire thing collapses when you just go back to first principles and you're honest about the things we do and don't know, and about the sources of our information that, may well have formed beliefs and convictions in us due to a brainwashing. Okay. Like, it doesn't matter how hard you believe it. It really doesn't. And I've had to go through this process with myself on every single issue. So I understand that it's not something that's comfortable and that people don't want to do it. And that, we all believe that we've done enough work on this subject. We're certain that that's right. Yes, I understand that your macro pattern and your first principles mean that this is wrong, but I've done the work. I've paid attention to this for 3 decades while you were just a teenager or some bullshit. And therefore, you know the truth about Iran. Okay. Give me a break. Speaking of, by the way, the claims, 30 years worth of claims about the Iranian bomb. I don't know who compiled this, or I don't remember who compiled this, but maybe it says on the video. But anyhow, check this out.
Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months.
They have the wherewithal, the stored up, preserved knowledge to make a bomb very quickly if they wanted to do it.
Iran is so dangerous. Weeks away from having the fissile material for an entire arsenal of nuclear bombs.
They're very close. They're 6 months away from being about 90% of having the enriched uranium for an atom bomb.
Iran is gearing up to produce 25 bombs, atomic bombs a year, 250 bombs in a decade.
Ladies and gentlemen, time is running out.
Iran will be capable of producing alone, without importing anything, nuclear bombs within 3 to 5 years.
That last clip was from 1996 or 1995. The one before that was 1996. The one before that was 2006. Then I think we had 2009 in there, 2015, 2018, and then what he said last Wednesday or Thursday. So 30 years of claims that Iran is about to conjure up their magical bomb. And still they haven't conjured one up. Or maybe they've conjured up so many and they've just kept them a secret. But if that's true, then they're actually not trying to wipe out Israel with a magical bomb. And therefore, we don't need to worry about them having a magical bomb. Okay? So the arguments are non-existent. There is no foundation to any of this. Okay? So the claim, just to be clear, because we talk about these things a bunch, the claim is not that every single piece, every single thing they say is false. It's that the foundational claims are clearly false or unsubstantiated. And therefore, anything that rests on those claims can just be discarded at that point. It doesn't matter whether it's true or false up there. We don't have to go through and prove all of those other aspects are fake. The foundations on which they rest are non-existent. You cannot found rational arguments on those premises. And therefore, the whole thing is gone. Okay? It's just immediately invalid at that point. That is basic logic. All right. Let me see where we are here. So, where did I lose my, man? One of my links. I'm going to have it back in no time. Here we are. Wonderful. Let's go back to the Wall Street Journal. This is from Wednesday. Trump privately approved of attack plans for Iran, but has withheld final order. Oh, cool. My highlights are gone. President Trump told senior aides late Tuesday that he approved of attack plans for Iran, but was holding off on giving the final order to see if Tehran will abandon its nuclear program. 3 people familiar with the deliberations said. So 3 people familiar. Anonymous sources. This could be a leak from a good side, or it could be a leak from the regime side trying to get this story out into the public, because if this is just disinformation, it's very effective. Since his private instructions in the White House Situation Room to the military, Trump has disclosed publicly that an attack is an option. Trump is hoping that threatening to join Israel's strikes on Iran, which continued for a 6th day, will compel Tehran to meet his demands, the people said. He acknowledged that a U.S. attack was under consideration, but said he may still decide against it. A senior White House official said multiple options remain on the table, and that Trump will continue to watch how the Israelis operate. I think that there was something down here from the end, but I'm going to let that go. So the Wall Street Journal says that Trump has this private attack plan. Now, as CanCon mentioned this morning, the military has plans for countless different scenarios. And as CanCon mentioned, they've got a zombie scenario. They've got a range of scenarios and probably a range of plans for a range of scenarios. So that there would be an attack plan against Iran is not an indication that an attack against Iran is coming. Okay. The anonymous reporting suggests that attack plan exists. So that's one part of it. And then the other part is, as we talked about a few months ago, if you remember the meeting that Elon Musk was supposed to be taking with the Pentagon, the New York Times came out with a report that there was an attack plan, something to deal with China, Taiwan, that was going to be presented in that meeting. And therefore, Elon going to that meeting was going to be a big problem because he has business with China. So he can't see that sort of thing because he's going to then submit that information back to China. All of that stuff, in my mind, is total bullshit. And the purpose of that story is the story itself, because they want people to go against Elon, think that Elon's a traitor, etc., and potentially restrict his access to the Pentagon, even though he's a defense contractor. So I look at this along those lines. That means absolutely nothing to me. And it turns out that that is the right standpoint, because it also doesn't mean anything to Donald Trump. This is how he responded to that article on Truth Social yesterday in the morning. The Wall Street Journal has no idea what my thoughts are concerning Iran. And of course they don't. The Wall Street Journal editorial board doesn't know anything. They are disseminators of the global regime's central narrative. And that is it. Okay. They get information from intelligence sources, sources within the military industrial complex, sources within the bureaucratic administrative deep state. And then they print whatever those people say. And they pretend that that is news that they've discovered through their reporting. These people don't know anything, which is why they're always wrong about everything. And why none of, like, if you apply any logical consistency, any first principles to what they're disseminating on a daily basis, on a day-to-day basis, like we do on this show, you realize pretty quickly, oh, none of this stuff can be trusted. And it should not be trusted, not only in the meaning that they're trying to get you to take on and believe, but any of the facts. Like, it's just, there's nothing there. And it's funny, actually, Shipwreck is a new member of Badlands. She has a show on Badlands once a week, and her show's really fun. She's entertaining. She's got a great personality. She's got a lot of integrity about a lot of this stuff. I'm not sure I would agree with her about everything, but I don't know the full picture in terms of her beliefs. But she, in describing Shipwreck, I forgot the point I was going to make about what she had put forward in this video the other day. I've totally lost it. Here we are, almost 3 hours and on a Friday, and my brain just collapses into mush. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do an ad. I'm going to think about it, and maybe it'll come back to me by the time I am finished with this ad. But this is for Truth Social. I love being on Truth Social. I have made it one of my two primary platforms. You can find me at I'm Your Moderator over on Truth Social. If you're looking for a great place online for news, discussion, and entertainment, then check out Truth Social, Donald Trump's social media website. You'll get breaking news, stories, and commentary from top media figures. If you want to see Trump's legendary Truth Social post, then get on Truth Social today. Join a growing community of patriots on a free speech platform designed to avoid censorship and cancellation by big tech. Make your voice heard. Join the movement. Join Truth Social. And again, when you hear censorship come back into the public conversation, that's the time to think maybe it's worth exploring another platform, because we don't want to find ourselves in the situation in which we found ourselves in early 2021 where we were kicked off of platforms and didn't have a solid backup plan where other people knew they could find us and where we could find other people. So Truth Social still seems to be the place to do that. And you know what's really interesting is Zero Hedge put this up the other day, and let me see if I can quickly find it. And it's very difficult to know ultimately what this meant, but do I have it? Yeah, here we go. This is Zero Hedge over on X, formerly Twitter. On Wednesday afternoon, Truth Social about to explode. Don't know what that means, but could be related to TikTok, even though Trump has extended the TikTok deadline now into, I think it is September, early September. That's a substantial extension on that. Nothing with Truth Social has been reflected in the stock price. DJT is as low as it's been in months, although it'll go right back up, I have no doubt. Same thing with Rumble and some of the other stocks in that space that are all kind of interlinked. Chris Pavlovsky the other day, maybe I can find this as well. No, I'm going to miss that one. But Pavlovsky said the other day that there were all sorts of problems last week for the cloud services for the other major cloud carriers, and that Rumble Cloud stayed online. And that, I think, is a big deal and an indication of the stability of these alternative and parallel systems actually increasing to the point of the ability to compete and withstand. Here's that Pavlovsky quote, post, I should say, on Truth Social. It's very interesting to see how Amazon Web Services, Cloudflare, and Google Cloud go down at the same time. How interconnected are they? Rumble Cloud is running flawlessly. If you're a serious business or government, it's clear your multi-cloud solution needs to include Rumble for redundancy. That is very interesting with everything that's going on in these spaces. By the way, X, I guess, is now almost ready to launch their payment integration and on that platform. And as everyone knows, they are attempting to make the everything app so that all the stuff you want to do online can be done in that one app. And, you know, any form of centralization is dangerous, but I believe that there's a possibility of a decentralized and open, like a hub that is a central hub can still allow for decentralization as long as it's not preventing any of the decentralization. So we've talked about that a bunch of times before. I don't need to go into it now. But if all the other platforms are bad and one platform can offer everything those other platforms do in a way that's not bad, that's not part of that regime system, well, maybe that's an acceptable form of centralization so long as there are no other encroachments. I don't know if it's possible, but we shall see. Anyhow, let's go back to the Iran stuff. I cannot recall what I was saying about the shipwreck thing. Yeah, I'm not, thank you guys in the chat, but I'm not mentioning, I'm not referring to the strikes on YouTube. It was something else, and I don't think it's going to come back to me. If it does, I will post about it later or something. She had this post that I noted over the week. Yes. Now I have remembered it. She was talking about, you know, with all of the analysis with these situations where we come to find out that the media is bullshitting us, that this or that is fake. You know, there are people out there, and I think that I would probably disagree with her on this one. And her conclusion is the same as my conclusion, but I think she was concerned about the problem of falling into nihilism, realizing that a lot of these things are fake. I don't think that is a problem. Okay. Everything else besides God can be something other than we understood it to be, even in ways that destabilize our understanding of our reality. As long as we are still anchored in the proper location, the nihilism is totally unnecessary. Okay. Like, I believe all of this stuff is fake, like across the board. If you show me something and you're like, hey, do you think this is totally real? I'll be like, no, probably not. Like, let's pick at it and see if we can find ways that it's fake. And we will inevitably find ways that it's fake, or at least unknowable. Okay. So I don't think of myself as a nihilist. I don't think that nihilism is a necessary conclusion to knocking out all of those pegs. But a lot of people are very careful not to knock them out because they think there's going to be something bad that happens afterward. The only thing that happens afterward is that you understand, actually, all of this stuff, all of this worldly stuff, is stuff about which we should be extremely skeptical. And that's it. Okay. That doesn't cause nihilism. Nihilism is the lack of faith, the lack of believing that there's something else that matters. Okay. The worldly stuff does not have to matter at all. In fact, the Bible's point is kind of that the worldly stuff doesn't matter and you actually need to be focused on something else. So I don't see nihilism at the end of that. But she then goes into talking about how we need to reconnect to our communities and our interests and the people around us, etc., which is the exact same thing I think. Okay. So we are totally on board with that. And I don't mean to misrepresent her. She might hear what I just said and be like, yes, okay, well, that is okay. But a lot of people will still fall into nihilism. And maybe that's true. That is not a reason not to be truthful about what we know and what we don't know. Rebel Nader in the chat thought that maybe I was reaching a little bit on my interpretation of these platforms. I don't know. We shall see. You might be right. We shall see. Okay, a few more things, and then we are on the way out of here. This is from yesterday in the White House press briefing room.
The ongoing situation in Iran. I know there has been a lot of speculation amongst all of you in the media regarding the president's decision-making and whether or not the United States will be directly involved. In light of that news, I have a message directly from the president, and I quote, "Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks." That's a quote directly from the president for all of you today. So we'll kick it off for questions here in our new meeting.
Okay. And so today, Tammy Bruce, the State Department spokeswoman, former TV character on Fox News. I mean, I guess you could still say TV character. Here we go.
U.S. citizens in Israel and the West Bank who would like to receive information on departure assistance should fill out the form that this website will take you to. This crisis intake form will also allow U.S. citizens in Iran to register their information. We do not anticipate offering direct U.S. government-assisted departure from Iran. Americans seeking departure should take advantage of existing means to leave. The Department of State has provided information and support to over 25,000 people seeking guidance regarding the situation in Israel, the West Bank, and Iran. And on Iran, I want to reiterate the statement from President Trump delivered by my colleague Caroline yesterday. Quote, "Based on the fact that there is a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place in the near future, I will make my decision of whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks." And now with so much.
So you have the statement read as a direct quotation in both instances. You got to think that that's intentional. They want that exact wording, talking about how the peace process might still be fruitful within the next 2 weeks. So he doesn't feel the need to make an immediate decision. We don't know that the decision is going to take 2 weeks, but sometime within the 2 weeks. And how do we think about those 2 weeks? Okay. Well, it's got to be immediately obvious that if Iran was within days of conjuring up a magical bomb, then waiting 2 weeks after having already waited 1 week, well, that would be a terrible thing. Okay. That would be like, you would basically just be allowing Iran to win at that point. Now, Trump wouldn't allow that. So we can immediately dismiss any claim that says Iran is days away from conjuring the magical bomb. That's just right off the table. Okay. What does the 2-week limit do? What does it cause? What's the reaction? Okay. Will there be a false flag event to attempt to bring Trump into the war on Israel's side? Totally possible. Now, we don't know that's going to happen. There was actually a hilarious headline. Some deranged blogger or something wrote like, no, Israel is not going to be sinking the USS Nimitz in a false flag event. Like, there's no evidence that that's going to happen. Yeah, no shit, Kami. There's no evidence. Everybody knows there's no evidence. We are projecting ahead in case something might happen. Okay. So that if and when it does happen, we're like, oh, well, we know what that is. The fact that they're trying to fact check a piece of speculation is just like the height of their brain brokenness. But back to the 2 weeks. Okay. So right now they've got this like fever pitch in the media and in the Republican establishment, the neocon, neoliberal establishment. Everybody wants Israel to go conquer Iran and wants the U.S. to join in that effort. That is what the push is. And people like Mark Levin screaming every night on television, going after people who disagree with him, all of that fever pitch. How do you keep that going for another 2 weeks to convince Donald Trump to get into this situation, to this war in quotes? You would have to keep ramping up that fever pitch. And that's what they've been trying to do over the last week. Oh, Israel's been hit by Iran again. Also, Israel is winning so hard. And because they're winning so hard, that means we can help them and it'll be easy. But because they're getting hit, that means we need to help them right now. Otherwise, they could be destroyed. So you see, they're super strong and super weak at the same time because we need to get in. And so they just keep taking these different angles. And everybody who knows, yes, Israel has to believe all these totally contradictory things in order to continue making their arguments. And they just keep increasing the pace and increasing the drama and increasing that fever pitch. That's not possible to do for another 2 weeks without supporting events, which would have to be then false flags. Okay. It's not like they're just going to get an event that makes it immediately obvious in the real world that Trump has to go to war with Iran. All right. We can just lose that mindset completely. That is like the Iraq, Afghanistan, early 2000s neocon mindset. And if anybody still has that mindset, get over it. It's ridiculous. Okay. It's not applicable to how the world operates. And so 2 more weeks of just chatter about Iran and Israel is only going to make it less likely that Trump goes, which is why the 2 weeks is wonderful. 2 weeks to slow the spread of the invisible enemy. And, you know, a lot of people think the invisible enemy is the global regime, and I would agree. So this 2 weeks to slow the spread might be very effective. Will there be a false flag? I don't know. But I do know that without a false flag, there is no way these people can keep the narrative operation going throughout the duration of that 2 weeks and still have people taking them seriously. They are already broken in the public narrative. Okay. Like all their defenses are down. Calling people anti-Semitic doesn't work anymore. People are like, okay, well, you know, we don't care. You can call us that if you want. I have no hate in my heart for anyone. But if you want to say I'm anti-Semitic, go ahead. Right? You want to say I'm racist, go ahead. Who cares? Doesn't hurt anymore. Nobody gets, you know, we used to get canceled and all that stuff. We have to get way beyond that. You're worried that like someone is going to attack your reputation or like make it so you can't have a job anymore. We should have all learned those lessons in 2021 with the vaccine mandates and in 2020 with all of the mitigation steps and the rest of it. Okay. Like compliance just isn't worth it in the long run. So they don't have like none of the tools in their toolbox work anymore. Their defenses are down. Their stories are not believable. And they have to keep ramping up those stories and escalate the tension over the course of these next 2 weeks. They have absolutely no chance of being able to do that. So what do? Got to be a false flag. I don't know what else it could be that would actually get people back in that mindset. Rebel Nader just became a monthly supporter. So thank you very much. I hope I understood your comments earlier and answered it adequately. You could totally be right, but I think that it is important to speculate on things so that we can, even if they are low probability possibilities, we want to understand the range of possibilities so that if things emerge in the real world that map onto those possibilities, we think, oh, I know what that could be. Like, I recognize that thing. That's why I think it's worth it to do it. And, you know, the idea that I think that's what's going to happen, I think that's what could happen. I have no idea what's going to happen, which is why we consider possibilities. All right. And, you know, that's worth something if you care about the issue. And if the issue has no effect on anybody, then maybe it's worth nothing. But in terms of a parallel communication apparatus and infrastructure, I think that that's a pretty important issue to anyone who's involved in any sort of communication via technology. And so if you use a cell phone or you use a computer, then that issue matters. So I think it's important to explore a bunch of possibilities and see what an ideal outcome might be. And maybe there is no ideal outcome that includes a centralized everything app. I can totally accept that. Also, maybe we haven't thought through everything that could mean. And if there are ways to verify what's inside that system, like Bitcoin, for instance, then maybe we have something. And there are decentralized social media platforms being built on Bitcoin. That already exists. So theoretically, I think that that's totally plausible. And then to have, cybersecurity protections based on Bitcoin provided for cloud services and social media platforms that are in that parallel infrastructure, totally possible in my mind. Although I could be wrong. That's just how it goes. Okay, so there were talks today. We are very close to the end here. There were talks today in Europe. This is our state media, NPR. At war with Israel, Iran urges new diplomacy in Geneva and the UN Security Council. Foreign ministers from the UK, France, and Germany met with their Iranian counterpart in Geneva on Friday, making the most significant known diplomatic talks between Tehran and Western governments since Israel launched a surprise offensive against Iran 1 week ago. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot, UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy, and German Foreign Minister Johann Vadeful, I don't know if that's how you say it or not, said in a joint statement released after the meeting that Israel and Iran should not do anything to aggravate the ongoing conflict between the countries. How very mature. They also said they question the necessity of Iran's nuclear programs and are trying to, quote, urgently find a negotiated solution to ensure that Iran never obtains or acquires a nuclear weapon. The foreign ministers also expressed their willingness to meet again and continue talks. There were also reports that the talks were tense and the rest of it. And there is a video I watched earlier of some U.S. ambassador to the UN talking about Iran's nuclear programs and the threats and blah, blah, blah. It's all just such nonsense. One thing to think about is the extent to which the initial reports of Israel's surprise attack could be totally and completely false in order to generate this entire narrative. Because surprising the global regime with new narratives that their propaganda apparatus is not prepared for is like their worst nightmare. And Trump is toying with them. It's like a yo-yo. He's saying, yeah, maybe I'll attack. And then later he's like, maybe I won't attack. Maybe I'll attack. Maybe I'll wait 2 weeks to decide whether I'll attack. Oh, I'm definitely going to attack. But, I'm not quite there. So we should still wait these 2 weeks. And that's kind of what's been going on. Let me see. I know that yes. So let's do it in this direction. I was thinking about whether or not I needed to edit on the fly. Here is Iran's foreign minister today.
The Americans who are seeking negotiations. They have sent messages multiple times, including very serious ones. But we have explicitly told them that as long as the aggression and attacks continue, there is simply no room for talk of dialogue or diplomacy. We are in a legitimate state of self-defense, and this defense cannot and will not stop. We have no discussions with the United States, which we see as a partner in these crimes.
So they are in the middle of negotiations, and they were having indirect negotiations prior to this surprise attack. And I would imagine at the end of all this, we will see the negotiations lead to the exact place they were described as as leading to prior to the event. And then what will that mean about the event? If Israel can go to war against Iran, and Iran can go to war against Israel, and then the deal is exactly the same as it was before, did a war happen? That's something to think about. If Russia and Ukraine reach the same deal that was in place prior to Putin's very brutal invasion, did the Russia-Ukraine war happen? Is it possible that wars are waged to get the deal that was already in place? That seems to be a no. So I don't know. Gonna have to decide that one for yourselves. Here is Donald Trump talking about the intelligence community's assessment of whether or not Israel has a bomb. And I actually haven't even watched this yet because it came out right before I was starting this show, or maybe even after I started it.
Intelligence do you have that Iran is building a nuclear weapon? Your intelligence community has said they have no evidence that they are at this point.
Well, then my intelligence community is wrong. Who in the intelligence community said that?
Your director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard.
She's wrong.
So I guess we'll find out. But also, there's this from the other day, which I think it's now just part of my show, and this is hilarious.
You don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do.
I might have done it already for all you know. Nobody knows what I'm going to do. It's fantastic. And let's finish on this quickly. CNN from earlier today, Xi and Putin present united front over Israel-Iran crisis in veiled message to Trump. In their call, Putin and Xi strongly condemned Israel's actions, calling them a breach of the UN Charter and other norms of international law, according to the Kremlin. The elephant in the room, of course, is Russia's own violations of international law in its ongoing war against Ukraine, which Beijing has consistently refused to condemn. In Beijing's readout, Xi struck a more measured tone and stopped short of explicitly condemning Israel, unlike his foreign minister, who did just that in a call with his Iranian counterpart last week. Instead, the Chinese leader urged the warring parties, especially Israel, to cease fire as soon as possible to avoid further escalation and regional spillover. So these are apparently veiled statements to Donald Trump, letting him know not to do anything. So we're going to see stories about Trump being Xi and Putin's puppet at the end of this once again. I am certain. All right, guys, we are going to leave it there. Starborn says there are talks about the Ethiopian dam again. All right, send those over to me, and then I will try to look into this whole Ethiopian dam business, this damn Ethiopian business. All right, everybody, I'm going to do just Tuesday and Friday next week. So I will be back on Tuesday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
You down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What must be what?
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.